The courtroom fell silent when Duke Cedric Aldridge entered through the oak doors, his black coat dusted with snow from the storm outside. Every nobleman present knew what happened to men who crossed him. The last lord who dared challenge his authority was found hanging from the bridge at dawn, his estate seized before sunset. Now they wanted to strip him of everything he had built with blood and steel. They wanted him broken, ruined, cast out like refuse. But Cedric had survived worse men than these, in darker places than this ornate hall with its golden chandeliers and lying mouths. He scanned the room slowly, memorizing every face that had come to watch him fall. And somewhere deep in that cold fortress where his heart should have been, something ancient and merciless began to wake. Stay with me through this descent into power and darkness, because what you think you know about monsters is about to change.
But brothers,
The chamber reeked of old wood and older money, the kind that believed birth meant more than survival. Cedric moved through the aisle between rows of velvet benches where Valmont's most powerful families sat like carrion birds waiting to feed. Their silk coats and jewelry caught the firelight, all that refined beauty built on foundations of peasant suffering and backroom deals soaked in blood. He knew these people, knew how they smiled while sharpening knives, knew how they spoke of honor while stealing land from farmers too weak to fight back. The marble floor echoed under his boots, each step measured and deliberate. He had learned long ago that men watched how you walked into a room. Show weakness for even a second, and they would tear you apart before you could draw breath to defend yourself. Chancellor Edmund Thormont sat behind the raised judge's bench, his white beard perfectly groomed, his robes pressed and formal. The old bastard had presided over Valmont's high court for 30 years, long enough to master the art of looking righteous while serving whoever paid best. Beside him sat 3 senior magistrates, their faces carefully blank, already bought and paid for by families who wanted Cedric destroyed. To the left, the prosecution table. Lord Marcus Halverton stood there in midnight blue velvet, his silver hair pulled back in a style that cost more than most men earned in a year. Marcus had smiled at Cedric during last month's gala, had raised a glass to his success, had sworn friendship with wine-soaked breath and lies that tasted like honey. Now he stood ready to advocate for Cedric's complete ruin. The gallery behind him buzzed with whispered conversations, noble parasites discussing his downfall like it was theater. Cedric felt their eyes crawling over him, felt their hunger for his destruction. Let them look. Let them think they had already won. He reached the defendant's table and remained standing. His attorney, a sharp-featured man named Cornelius Vance, gestured toward the chair, but Cedric ignored him. Sitting felt like surrender, and he had not survived the last 15 years by surrendering anything. Chancellor Thormont struck his gavel twice. The sound cracked through the chamber like bones breaking. This court is convened to address charges brought against Duke Cedric Aldridge, Lord of the Northern Reach, Master of Thornhold Estate. The charges are severe: fraud, embezzlement, manipulation of trade contracts, and conspiracy to defraud the royal treasury. The words hung in the air like smoke. Cedric did not move, did not blink. Every face in the room watched for his reaction, searching for fear or guilt or an anger they could use against him. He gave them nothing. Marcus Halverton rose smoothly, his voice pitched to carry through the chamber with practiced ease. Your Honors, what we present today is not merely a case of financial misconduct. It is evidence of a systematic campaign to consolidate power through illegal means. Duke Aldridge has used his position to manipulate trade agreements, siphon funds from royal accounts, and eliminate business competitors through methods that border on extortion. Cedric's jaw tightened. Every word Marcus spoke was technically accurate, but stripped of context until it sounded like villainy instead of survival. Yes, he had manipulated trade agreements, because the alternative was letting Southern merchants strangle the Northern economy. Yes, he had diverted funds, but only to rebuild infrastructure that the Crown had neglected for decades. And yes, he had eliminated competitors, the ones who tried to flood Valmont with poisoned grain and counterfeit medicine that killed children in the streets. But truth did not matter in rooms like this. Only narrative. Only who could tell the better story. Marcus continued, his voice rising with theatrical outrage. For 15 years, this man has operated beyond the reach of law. He claims to serve the kingdom, but he serves only himself. He has built an empire on the backs of honest merchants and farmers, extracting wealth while giving nothing in return. Lies. All of it lies wrapped in enough truth to make them believable. Kedrick finally spoke, his voice cutting through Marcus's performance like steel through silk. "Are you finished?" The chamber went silent. Even Chancellor Thormont looked surprised that the accused had dared interrupt the prosecution. Marcus turned slowly, his expression showing controlled offense. "You will have your opportunity to speak, Duke Aldridge, but first, first you will finish your fiction." Kedrick took a step forward, his presence filling the space between them. "You will tell these people that I am a thief and a fraud. You will present forged documents and bribed witnesses. You will paint me as everything wrong with this kingdom. And then when you are done performing, we will discuss the truth." Chancellor Thormont's gavel came down hard. "Duke Aldridge, you will restrain yourself or be held in contempt." Kedrick looked at the old man with something close to pity. Thormont had probably convinced himself this was justice, that bringing down a powerful duke served some higher purpose. He did not understand that he was just another tool being used by families who wanted what Kedrick had built. "My apologies, Chancellor." Kedrick's tone made it clear the apology meant nothing. "Please, allow Lord Halverton to continue his entertainment." Marcus's composure cracked slightly, anger flashing behind his eyes before he controlled it. "Good." Kedrick wanted him angry. Angry men made mistakes. The prosecution spent the next 2 hours presenting their case. Documents appeared showing irregular financial transfers from royal accounts to shell companies traced back to Thornhold Estate. Witnesses testified about trade deals negotiated in private, about competitors who suddenly lost contracts after refusing Kedrick's offers, about funds that disappeared into northern projects with no oversight. Each piece of evidence built on the last, creating a narrative of systematic corruption. The magistrates listened with grave expressions, occasionally asking questions that sounded neutral but leaned toward guilt. The gallery murmured its approval, the sound of jackals sensing blood. Kedrick watched it all with cold detachment, his mind working through the evidence, identifying fabrications, noting which witnesses had been coached and which had been threatened. This was a professional destruction, planned and executed by people who understood how to use the legal system as a weapon. When Marcus finally sat down, looking satisfied with his performance, Chancellor Thormont turned to Kedrick. "Duke Aldridge, you may present your defense." Bekram. Cornelius Vance stood quickly, shuffling papers with nervous energy. "Your honors, if I may." "You may not." Kedrick cut him off without looking. "I will speak for myself." Vance sank back into his chair, pale and sweating. The man was competent enough at contract law, but this required something beyond legal expertise. This required understanding the nature of power, and Vance had lived his entire life serving it rather than wielding it. Kedrick moved to the center of the chamber, positioning himself where everyone could see him clearly. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look even more severe than usual. 15 years ago, I was given lordship over the Northern Reach. You all remember what that meant. The region was dying, infrastructure crumbling, trade routes controlled by southern merchants who bled the north dry while giving nothing back. Farmers could not get their crops to market. Craftsmen could not get materials. Children were starving in villages that should have been prosperous. His voice did not rise, but it carried through the chamber with absolute authority. I was 24 years old. I had no allies, no fortune, just a title and a territory falling into ruin. The crown offered no help. The noble houses offered nothing but mockery. I was expected to fail, to sell off what remained and slink away in shame. Kedrick paused, letting them remember. Some of the older nobles shifted uncomfortably, because they had been among those who laughed at the young duke's impossible task. So I did what men do when they have nothing left to lose. I fought. I negotiated with merchants who thought they could cheat me. I made deals with traders who thought I was too young to understand their schemes. I took money meant for the royal treasury and used it to rebuild roads, because the crown was not going to do it and my people were dying. Chancellor Thormont interrupted. You admit to the theft then? I admit to prioritizing survival over procedure. I admit to believing that feeding children mattered more than filling the coffers of nobles who have never missed a meal in their lives. The gallery erupted in whispers. Marcus shot to his feet. Your honors, he confesses to the charges outright. I confess to nothing. Kedrick's voice dropped to something dangerous. I acknowledge reality. And the reality is that every man in this room who claims I acted illegally has himself bent laws to suit his purposes. Every magistrate on that bench has accepted gifts from families seeking favorable rulings. Every lord and lady watching this performance has used their position to extract wealth from those beneath them. The chamber exploded in outrage. Voices rose in protest, nobles shouting denials, magistrates demanding order. Chancellor Thormont's gavel slammed down repeatedly, the sound lost in the chaos. Kedrick did not move, did not raise his voice. He simply stood there while the room dissolved around him, a fixed point in a storm of expensive fury. When the noise finally subsided, Thormont's face had gone red with anger. Duke Aldridge, you will retract those statements immediately. I will not. Then you leave me no choice. I hold you in contempt of court. You will be removed. Remove me, and you prove my point. Kedrick took a step toward the bench, his presence somehow larger than his physical form. You want me gone, not because I broke laws, but because I refuse to pretend your laws apply equally. You want me destroyed not because I am corrupt, but because I am effective. Marcus moved between them, his composure cracking completely now. You arrogant bastard! You think you are above judgment? You think your precious northern territory gives you the right to bookgate? I think nothing gives anyone rights. Kedrick spoke directly to Marcus, ignoring the magistrates entirely. Rights are fictions we tell ourselves to feel civilized. What matters is power. I had none 15 years ago. Now I do. And that terrifies you. What terrifies us is your disregard for law, for order, for everything that holds this kingdom together. What holds this kingdom together is force and fear and the willingness to do what others will not. You know this, Marcus. Your family has practiced it for 3 generations. The difference is, I do not pretend otherwise. Marcus's hand moved toward his coat, toward the ceremonial sword nobles were allowed to wear in court. For a moment, the threat of violence hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Then Cornelius Vance was between them, his voice high and panicked. Your honors, please let us maintain order. Duke Aldridge is understandably emotional, given the severity of... I am not emotional. Kedrick's tone could have frozen fire. I am stating facts. Lord Halverton wants my territory. The families backing this prosecution want control of northern trade routes. They have dressed their greed in the language of justice and convinced you to participate in their theft. Chancellor Thormont stood, his own anger barely controlled now. Enough. Duke Kedrick Aldridge, you are found guilty of contempt. You will be remanded to custody until... You cannot imprison me. Guards! 6 armed men entered from side doors, their hands on weapons but their movements uncertain. They knew who Kedrick was, knew what happened to men who tried to restrain him. Kedrick looked at them with something close to pity. You do not want to do this. The lead guard, a scarred veteran named Thomas, hesitated. He had fought beside Kedrick years ago, before Kedrick became a duke, back when they were both young men trying to survive a border war that killed everything it touched. My lord, please do not make this worse. It cannot be worse, Thomas. They have already decided. This trial is theater. You know it. I know it. The only question is whether you want to be part of the performance. Thomas's hand tightened on his sword hilt, but he did not draw. The other guards looked at each other, uncertainty clear on their faces. Marcus's voice cracked through the tension. Arrest him! Now! The guards moved forward slowly, reluctantly. Kedrick did not resist as they surrounded him, as Thomas reached for his arm with apologetic eyes. I am sorry, my lord. Do not apologize for following orders, Thomas. It is the only thing keeping you alive in a world like this. As the guards led him toward the side door, Kedrick looked back once at the chamber full of nobles and magistrates and witnesses. They watched him go with satisfaction and fear mixed equally on their faces, believing they had won, believing they had finally brought down the man who had defied them for so long. He gave them a smile then, not warm, not kind. The smile of a wolf watching sheep congratulate themselves for building a pen that cannot hold it. This is not over. 3 words. Quiet. Absolute. The door closed behind him, and in the sudden silence, every person in that chamber felt something cold settle into their bones, a whisper that maybe they had not won anything at all. The holding cell beneath the courthouse was small and dark, lit by a single barred window high on the stone wall. Kadrick sat on the wooden bench bolted to the floor, his coat removed, his shirt open at the collar. The guards had taken his weapons but left him otherwise unrestrained, a courtesy, or perhaps an acknowledgement that chains would not stop him if he decided to leave. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Heavy boots. Multiple men. The door opened and Thomas entered, followed by two guards Kadrick did not recognize. "You have a visitor, my lord." A woman stepped into the cell, her dark blue dress expensive but not ostentatious, her blonde hair pulled back in a practical style that suggested she cared more about function than fashion. Isabella Crane, owner of the largest shipping company in Valmont, had built her fortune through ruthless efficiency and a willingness to work with anyone who could help her business grow, including Kadrick. The guards withdrew, closing the door but remaining visible through the small barred window. Isabella studied Kadrick for a moment before speaking, her voice low and direct. "They are moving faster than we thought. Marcus has already begun filing seizure orders for Thornhold Estate. By tomorrow morning, your assets will be frozen. By tomorrow night, they will begin transferring ownership. Expected." Expected? Isabella's composure cracked slightly. "Kadrick, they are taking everything. The estate, the trade routes, the contracts, everything you have built. They are taking the things they can see, the things documented in legal papers and property registries. They are not taking the things that matter." Isabella moved closer, her frustration evident. "What things?" "Your influence, your reputation. Those die with your fortune. You know how this works. Without resources, you are nothing in this world." Kadrick looked at her steadily, his expression unreadable. "Is that what you believe? That I am nothing without Thornhold?" "I believe that power requires foundation. You taught me that. You cannot fight from a position of weakness." I have fought from positions of weakness my entire life." He stood slowly, moving to the barred window where pale afternoon light filtered through. "When I first came to the north, I had nothing. No money, no connections, just the ability to see patterns others missed, to understand what men wanted and how to use that against them. And now they have learned your methods and turned them against you." "No." Kadrick turned back to face her. "They have learned to imitate the surface. They do not understand the depth. Marcus thinks he has won because he has secured legal rulings and property seizures. He does not understand that I never needed those things. I used them because they were available, because they made certain actions easier, but I do not require them." Isabella studied him with the calculating gaze of a woman who had built an empire in a world that did not want women building empires. "What are you planning?" "Most planning suggests I have not already prepared for this moment. Isabella, I knew this was coming months ago. Every document they presented today, I knew about. Every witness they called, I knew about. This entire performance was choreographed by families who believe legal process means anything beyond force dressed in robes." "Then why did you not prevent it?" "Because preventing it would have revealed how much I actually control. Better to let them think they have won. Let them claim Thornhold. Let them divide my assets among themselves like dogs fighting over scraps. While they are busy with that distraction, I will do what needs to be done." Isabella was silent for a long moment, then, quietly, "Which is, Seb." Kadrick moved close enough that the guards could not hear, his voice dropping to something that belonged in darker places than this cell. "Marcus has a daughter, 17 years old, beautiful, sheltered. She knows nothing of her father's business, except what he tells her over dinner. Last month, I learned that she has been sending letters to a young man her father disapproves of, a merchant's son with no title and no prospects. Marcus has forbidden the relationship, threatened the boy, done everything he can to end it. And the girl is in love, or thinks she is, which amounts to the same thing. She will do anything to protect that relationship, including things she should not do." Isabella's eyes widened slightly as understanding dawned. "Kadrick? No, she is a child. She is 17, old enough to make choices, old enough to face consequences. What are you going to do?" Nothing. I'm going to do nothing at all. But her father's enemies might discover those letters, might realize that Marcus has a vulnerability he has tried very hard to keep hidden. And when that information becomes public, when the girl's reputation is destroyed and Marcus has to choose between protecting his daughter and maintaining his political position. He trailed off, letting Isabella complete the thought herself. She stepped back, and for the first time since entering the cell, she looked at Cadric like he was something foreign and frightening. That is monstrous. That is survival. Marcus chose to destroy me. I am simply returning the favor in a currency he understands. She is innocent in this. She has done nothing to you. She is not innocent. No one in families like that is innocent. She benefits from her father's power, from the wealth he has stolen, and the lives he has ruined. She wears silk purchased with blood money and dines on meals bought with corruption. Her ignorance does not absolve her. You're talking about ruining a girl's life to hurt her father. I'm talking about using the same methods Marcus used against me. He turned my business partners into witnesses against me. He pressured merchants into providing testimony they knew was false. He destroyed families who relied on my trade routes to survive. Where was your moral outrage then? Isabella had no answer. She knew the kind of man Marcus was, knew the kind of destruction men like him caused. But there was a difference between understanding that intellectually and watching it happen in real time. This will not bring you back what you lost. I do not want it back. I want them to understand that crossing me has consequences. I want every noble family in Valmont to remember what happened to Marcus Halverton when he tried to destroy Cadric Aldridge. I want them to lie awake at night wondering if they are next. Fear is the only language they understand, so I will speak it fluently. The door opened again. Chancellor Thorimont entered, his expression grave, his official robe still perfect, despite the day's events. The guards straightened immediately, but Thorimont waved them back. Lady Crane, you need to leave. Isabella looked between the Chancellor and Caedric, her expression conflicted. Then she nodded once and left without another word, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Thorimont waited until they were alone before speaking, his voice low and tired. Do you understand what you have done? I defended myself against a coordinated attack by families who want to carve up the North like a feast. Yes, Edmund, I understand perfectly. The use of his first name made Thorimont flinch slightly. They had known each other for years, had negotiated countless agreements, had shared drinks in rooms far less formal than courtrooms. But that familiarity had evaporated the moment Thorimont allowed this trial to proceed. I did not want this, Cedric. I argued against it. But the pressure from the noble houses, from the crown itself, I had no choice. Everyone has a choice, Edmund. You chose your position over your principles. I do not blame you for that. Most men make the same choice. But do not stand here and pretend you are a victim of circumstance. Thormont's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Instead, he pulled a folded document from his robes and held it out. This is the official sentencing. You will be stripped of your title. Thornhold Estate and all associated properties will be seized by the crown and redistributed. You are banished from Valmont under penalty of death should you return. Cedric took the document but did not look at it. When? Tomorrow at dawn. They want you gone before anyone can organize a defense. Marcus and his allies are afraid you might rally support if given time. Smart, cruel, but smart. There is one more thing. Thormont hesitated, and for the first time, Cedric saw genuine fear in the old man's eyes. They are sending you north, beyond the Reach, into the territories no one controls. The words hung heavy in the cold cell. The northern territories beyond the Reach were savage lands where civilization ended and something older took over. Men who went there rarely returned, and those who did came back changed, haunted by things they refused to name. It was not just banishment, it was execution by exposure. Cedric's expression did not change, but something dark flickered behind his eyes. So Marcus wants to ensure I never return. Thorough. Cedric, listen to me. Thormont moved closer, his voice urgent now. You can still negotiate, apologize to the court, accept a lighter sentence, exile to the southern provinces, perhaps. You could rebuild there, start fresh somewhere they cannot reach you. But And spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to finish what they started? No, Edmund. I have never run from consequences. I will not start now. Then you're going to die out there. Those lands will kill you. Maybe. Kedrick handed the document back. Or maybe I will find something in those lands worth bringing back. Thormont stared at him, uncomprehending. Then he shook his head slowly, the way men do when they know words will not change anything. I am sorry, Kedrick, truly. Do not apologize. You did what you thought necessary to survive. I respect that, even if I do not forgive it. The Chancellor left without another word, and Kedrick was alone again in the growing darkness. Hours passed. The window above shifted from pale daylight to the deep purple of evening. Guards changed shifts. Somewhere in the courthouse above, nobles celebrated his downfall with wine and toasts, their laughter filtering down through stone and iron. Kedrick sat in the darkness and planned. They thought they had broken him, thought they had removed his power and his influence and left him with nothing. They did not understand that everything he had built, every connection he had made, every piece of leverage he had acquired over 15 years existed in the spaces between documents and property lines. Marcus wanted to destroy him? Fine. But Marcus had made a fundamental mistake. He had assumed that Kedrick valued what he had built more than he valued revenge. He was wrong. The northern territories might kill him. Probably would. But Kedrick had survived worse odds with less preparation. And if he did survive, if he found what he suspected existed in those savage lands beyond civilization's edge, then Marcus and everyone who had participated in his destruction would learn exactly what happened when you tried to kill a wolf and failed. The door opened one final time. Thomas stood there, his expression apologetic. My lord, it is time. They want you prepared for transport at first light. Kedrick rose slowly, stretching muscles that had tensed during hours of stillness. He followed Thomas down the corridor, past cells holding lesser criminals, past guards who averted their eyes rather than meet his gaze. They brought him to a preparation room where his belongings waited. His coat, his weapons, returned now that he was being expelled rather than held. A traveling pack with basic supplies, enough to survive a few days in the wilderness before it killed him. Thomas helped him dress, his movements efficient but reluctant. My lord, I want you to know, what they did today was wrong. Many of us see it, but we are soldiers. We follow orders. I know, Thomas, and I do not hold it against you. But remember this moment. Remember what happened when good men followed bad orders because it was easier than questioning them. What would you have us do? Rebel against the court? Start a civil war? I would have you remember that power only exists because men agree to follow it. The moment they stop agreeing, the moment they decide their principles matter more than their orders, power evaporates like morning mist. But most men never reach that moment. They follow orders until they die or until something makes them stop. And what will make us stop? Kedrick looked at Thomas directly, and in his eyes the younger man saw something that made him step back involuntarily. What comes after I leave? Before Thomas could ask what that meant, other guards entered, ready to escort Kedrick to the transport that would take him to the northern edge of the kingdom. They moved through empty corridors, through side exits that avoided the main courthouse where nobles might still be celebrating. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thick and heavy, covering the city in white silence. A horse-drawn wagon waited, its driver wrapped against the cold, 2 armed guards already seated in the back. This was not a formal exile procession. This was a criminal being removed from sight as quickly as possible. Kedrick climbed into the wagon without assistance, settling onto the hard bench. The guards flanked him, their hands on weapons but their expressions uncomfortable. They were professionals doing a distasteful job. As the wagon began moving through dark streets, Kedrick looked back once at the courthouse, its windows glowing with firelight and celebration. Somewhere in those rooms, Marcus Halverton was toasting his victory. Somewhere, noble families were discussing how they would divide Kedrick's former territories among themselves. Let them celebrate. Let them believe they had won. The wagon turned a corner and the courthouse disappeared behind buildings and falling snow. Ahead lay the northern road, the long journey to the edge of civilization, and then the wild territories where law and order meant nothing, and survival required methods even Kedrick had never fully mastered. But as the city walls receded behind them and the wilderness opened up ahead, Kadrick felt something he had not felt in years. Freedom. They had taken his title, his estate, his place in civilized society. They thought they had taken everything. They were about to learn they had freed something far more dangerous than the Duke they had tried to destroy. The snow fell harder. The wagon rolled north, and behind them, in the warm halls of power where nobles schemed and celebrated, no one yet understood that they had not executed a threat. They had unleashed it. The wagon wheels ground through snow and frozen mud for 3 days before the driver finally stopped at a crossroads where civilization ended and something older began. No marker, no sign. Just a place where the road narrowed to a trail and the trees grew close enough to block out the sky. The guards climbed down first, their breath misting in the morning cold. One of them, a square-jawed man named Peters, gestured toward the tree line with his rifle. "Get out." Kadrick stepped down from the wagon, his boots sinking into snow that came up past his ankles. His travel pack hit the ground beside him, landing with a dull thud that scattered powder into the air. The supplies inside would last maybe 5 days if he rationed carefully. After that, he would need to hunt or forage or die. Peters pointed north toward where the trail disappeared into dense forest. That way. Keep walking until you cannot see the road anymore. Do not come back. Anyone catches you south of this point, you hang. Kadrick looked at the man without expression. Peters had the stance of someone who had spent years following orders without questioning them. His whole identity wrapped up in the uniform and the authority it represented. Remove those things, and he would collapse into nothing. You ever wonder what happens to men like you when the orders stop coming? Peters blinked, confused by the question. What? When the people giving you orders are gone. When there is no one left to tell you what to do. What happens then? I do my job. That is what happens. Kadrick almost smiled. Almost. No. You stand in the snow wondering why following orders your entire life left you empty. But you will not figure it out until it is too late. The other guard, younger and clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, shifted his weight from foot to foot. We should go. Storm coming. Peters ignored him, his jaw tightening as he processed what Kadrick had said. Then he spat into the snow. You talk like you know something we do not, but you are the one being exiled. You are the one who lost everything. I lost things I owned. You never had anything to lose in the first place. Before Peters could respond, Kadrick turned and walked toward the tree line, his pack over one shoulder, his coat pulled tight against wind that cut through fabric like it was nothing. He did not look back. There was no point. Those men were already ghosts, their lives playing out in predictable patterns until age or violence ended them. The forest swallowed him within minutes. Trees closed in overhead, their branches bare and skeletal against a gray sky that promised more snow. The trail became harder to follow, obscured by drifts and fallen logs. Animal tracks crisscrossed the path, some fresh enough that Kadrick could see individual claw marks in the frozen earth. He walked for hours, his breath coming in steady clouds, his body settling into the rhythm of movement that burned calories and generated heat. The cold tried to work its way through his coat, through his boots, into the core of him where it could do real damage. He ignored it. Cold was just another form of pressure, and he had spent his entire life learning to function under pressure. By mid-afternoon, the trail had disappeared completely. Kadrick stopped beside a frozen stream, kneeling to examine the ice. Thick enough to hold his weight. He could see rocks beneath the surface, dark shapes suspended in crystalline prison. Following the stream meant finding lower ground, possibly shelter, definitely water, once he could break through to it. He adjusted his pack and kept moving. The forest changed as he went deeper. The trees grew larger, older, their trunks twisted into shapes that suggested they had been fighting each other for centuries. Moss covered everything, thick and green even in winter. The silence felt wrong, too complete, like the woods were holding their breath. Kadrick had spent time in wilderness before, had learned to hunt and track during his younger years, when survival meant being useful to people with more power. But this felt different. This felt watched. He made camp before dark, finding a cluster of rocks that formed a natural windbreak. No fire. Smoke would be visible for miles, and he had no idea what else lived in these woods or whether it would be drawn to flame. Instead, he ate dried meat from his pack and drank melted snow, the water so cold it made his teeth ache. Then he sat with his back against stone and waited for night. It came fast and absolute, darkness so thick it felt physical. No moon, no stars, just black pressing in from all sides. Kadrick sat perfectly still, his knife in his hand, listening to the forest around him. Something moved in the darkness, not close, maybe 30 yards out. The sound of weight shifting, of something large navigating between trees. Kedrick did not move, did not breathe louder than necessary. Whatever was out there, it had not decided he was food yet. Better to let it keep thinking. The sound circled his camp slowly, deliberately. Predator behavior. Testing for weakness, for fear, for any sign that the prey might panic and run. Kedrick had seen it before in animals and in men. The approach was always the same. Minutes passed. The circling stopped. Then, from the darkness, a voice. "You are far from the courts, Duke." Kedrick's hand tightened on his knife, but he did not stand, did not give away his exact position by moving. "Who is there?" The voice came from a different direction now, closer. "Someone who knows what you are. Someone who has been watching men like you stumble into these woods for longer than your kingdom has existed. Show yourself." Why? So you can see that the thing speaking to you is not the shape you expect? So you can try to fight it with that knife you are holding. Better to sit still and listen. Kedrick processed the words, the tone, the implications. This was not a random encounter. Whatever was out there had been waiting for him specifically. "What do you want?" The voice laughed, a sound like wind through hollow trees. "The same thing you want. To see what happens when a man with nothing left to lose walks into darkness and refuses to die." "I am not interested in riddles." "Good. I hate riddles. They waste time. So here's the truth, Duke. These lands do not belong to your kingdom. They never did. Your people built their cities and roads and pretended the wilderness ended where their maps stopped. But the wilderness does not care about maps. It has been here since before your ancestors learned to forge iron, and it will be here long after your civilization collapses into dust. And you want me to know this because you have a choice to make. You can keep walking north until cold or hunger or something worse kills you. Or you can accept that you stumbled into something older than exile and see where it leads. Kedrick considered his options. This could be madness brought on by cold and isolation. Or it could be exactly what it presented itself as, something ancient offering a bargain. Either way, dying slowly in the wilderness had never been his plan. What do I have to do? Survive the next 3 days. Do not try to leave. Do not try to fight what comes for you. Just survive. Say, if you are still breathing when the third night ends, we will talk again about what you really want. The presence in the darkness withdrew, the sensation of being watched fading like smoke. Kedrick sat for a long time afterward, his knife still drawn, his mind working through what had just happened. Something in these woods was aware, intelligent, interested in him specifically. He should be terrified. Instead, he felt something close to curiosity. The first test came before dawn. Kedrick woke to the sound of breathing, deep and rhythmic, close enough that he could feel warmth displacing the frozen air. He opened his eyes slowly, carefully, and found himself staring into the face of something that should not exist. A wolf, but wrong. Too large, its shoulders easily 6 feet high. Its fur was the color of old bone, and its eyes reflected light that was not there, glowing faint yellow in the pre-dawn darkness. It stood less than 10 feet away, watching him with an intelligence that went far beyond animal instinct. Kedrick did not move. His knife was in his hand, but useless against something that size. If it decided to kill him, he would die. Simple as that. The wolf tilted its head, studying him the way a scholar might study an interesting specimen. Then it turned and walked away, its massive paws leaving prints in the snow that steamed faintly in the cold air. Kedrick exhaled slowly and realized his heart was hammering against his ribs. Not fear, recognition. Whatever that thing was, it had made a decision about him. Let him live. For now. He broke camp and kept moving, following the stream deeper into the forest. The trees grew even larger here, their trunks wide enough that 3 men could not circle them with linked arms. The bark was black and smooth, almost like stone. Roots broke through the snow in twisted patterns that looked deliberate, like words in a language he did not know. By midday, he found the first body. A man, or what remained of one. Frozen solid, half buried in a drift. His clothes marked him as a merchant, someone who had probably been traveling the trade routes before getting lost or separated from his caravan. His face was turned skyward, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes gone to scavengers or rot. Kedrick searched the body efficiently, finding nothing useful. The merchant's pack was missing, his pockets empty. Someone or something had already stripped him of anything valuable. He kept moving. The second body appeared an hour later. Another traveler, this one wearing the remains of a soldier's uniform. Royal insignia still visible on the tattered coat. The man had been dead longer than the merchant, his flesh mummified by cold and time. His hand still gripped a sword that had corroded to rust. Kedrick studied the positioning. The soldier had died fighting, that much was clear. Defensive wounds on his arms, sword drawn. But there was no blood on the blade, no evidence that he had injured whatever killed him. A pattern was forming. The forest did not just kill people, it collected them, put them on display like warnings or trophies. Every corpse was a message to anyone who wandered into these lands, thinking they could survive through strength or skill alone. By the time darkness fell on the first day, Kedrick had counted 7 bodies, all different, all positioned where travelers would find them, all stripped of supplies and left to freeze. He made camp beside a fallen log, eating sparingly from his dwindling supplies. No fire again. No unnecessary movement. Just stillness and cold and the absolute certainty that something was watching. The voice returned after midnight. You found the markers. Kedrick did not bother turning toward the sound. The darkness was so complete that turning made no difference. Those were people. They were examples. Men who came into these lands thinking they could conquer them the way they conquered everything else. They were wrong, and you killed them. I did nothing. The wilderness killed them. I simply made sure their deaths served a purpose, which was teaching men like you that survival here requires different rules. Your courts and laws and noble titles mean nothing in these woods. Power does not come from position or wealth. It comes from understanding what the darkness wants and being willing to give it. Kedrick felt cold that had nothing to do with temperature. What does the darkness want? The same thing you want, Duke. Recognition. The world you came from pretends that civilization is the natural state of humanity, that law and order are what separate men from beasts. But you know better. You have always known. Civilization is just a thin mask over the same violence and hunger that drives everything else. You built your power by accepting that truth. Now the question is whether you can accept it completely. By doing what? The second test comes tomorrow. When it does, you will have to choose. Fight the way you fought in your courts, using strategy and manipulation and control. Or fight the way things fight here, using nothing but will and violence and the refusal to submit. And if I choose wrong, then you will join the examples. And someone else will find your body frozen in the snow. One more warning that civilization ends where we say it ends. The presence withdrew again, leaving Kedrick alone with his thoughts and the absolute darkness pressing in from all sides. He did not sleep that night. The second test came at dawn. Kedrick was following the stream when he heard the sound of men's voices ahead, rough and argumentative. He moved carefully through the trees until he could see them. 4 men, armed and dangerous, standing around a small fire. Their clothes marked them as outlaws or deserters, the kind of men who fled civilization's collapse into wilderness, hoping to find freedom. Their faces showed what that freedom had cost them. Gaunt, scarred, eyes that had seen things and stopped caring. They had a prisoner. A woman, maybe 25, bound and gagged beside the fire. Her clothes were torn, her face bruised. One of the men kicked her casually as he passed, and she curled into a ball trying to protect herself. Kedrick watched from cover, his mind calculating options. 4 armed men, 1 knife. No element of surprise if they were alert. The smart move was to keep walking, let whatever was going to happen, preserve his own chances of survival. But the voice had said this was a test, and tests required choices that revealed something. He studied the men more carefully. The leader was obvious, a thick-shouldered brute with a beard that had not been trimmed in months. He carried a sword and a confidence that said he was used to being the biggest threat in any room. The other 3 deferred to him, watching his reactions before committing to their own. Take out the leader and the others might scatter, or they might become desperate and more dangerous. Kedrick moved through the trees, circling until he was upwind and behind them. The snow muffled his footsteps. The wind covered the sound of branches moving. He got within 15 feet before the leader sensed something and turned, his hand going to his sword. Kedrick stepped into view, his knife visible, but held low and non-threatening. Morning. The men reacted instantly, weapons coming up, positioning themselves between Kaedric and their fire. The leader studied him with predator eyes, taking in his quality coat, his clean hands, the fact that he looked too well fed to have been in the wilderness long. You are lost, friend. No, just passing through. This is our territory. You want to pass, there is a toll. Kedrick looked at the woman, then back at the leader. What is the toll? Everything you have. Coat, boots, food. Then we let you walk away. Maybe. And her? What about her? She is ours. We found her yesterday stumbling through the woods. She is entertainment until we get bored. Kedrick felt something shift inside him, a calculation completing itself. These men were going to kill him, regardless of what he said or did. The toll was fiction. They had already decided to take everything and leave him to freeze, which meant he had nothing to lose by fighting. I have a counteroffer. The leader grinned, showing teeth that had gone bad years ago. Oh? Let us hear it. You let her go. Walk away. I will not kill you. The men laughed, genuine amusement at the idea that one man with a knife could threaten 4 armed outlaws. The leader's grin widened. You got balls, I will give you that. But balls do not... Kedrick moved. He closed the distance before the leader could finish his sentence, his knife driving up under the man's ribs, finding the lung, twisting. The leader's eyes went wide with shock and pain, his sword halfway out of its sheath, useless. Kedrick ripped the blade free and kicked the dying man into the nearest outlaw, using the body as a shield while he closed on the second target. That one got his sword up, managed a wild swing that Kaedric slipped under before driving his knife into the man's throat. Blood sprayed hot across his hands, across his face, steam rising where it hit the frozen air. The third outlaw turned to run. Kaedric picked up the fallen sword, tested its weight for half a second, then threw it like a spear. The blade took the running man between the shoulder blades, punching through leather and flesh, dropping him face first into the snow. The fourth outlaw stood frozen, his weapon trembling in his hands, his eyes darting between his dead companions and the man who had killed them in less than 10 seconds. Kaedric walked toward him slowly, deliberately, his knife dripping red into white snow. You have a choice. Run now, and maybe live, or stay and definitely die. The outlaw dropped his sword and ran, crashing through the forest like a panicked animal, branches snapping, snow flying. Kaedric let him go. He turned to the woman, who was staring at him with terror that looked identical to the terror she had shown the outlaws. He cut her bonds carefully, stepped back to give her space. Can you walk? She nodded, unable to speak, her hands shaking as she pulled the gag free. There is a trail south. Follow it. Do not stop. Do not look back. If you move fast, you can reach the border before dark. She scrambled to her feet, still staring at him like he was something more dangerous than the men who had taken her. Then she ran, disappearing into the trees without a word. Kaedric stood alone beside the fire, surrounded by corpses, his hands covered in blood that was already starting to freeze. He cleaned his knife on one of the dead men's coats, retrieved the thrown sword, examined it properly. Decent steel. Better than he had expected. He took a belt and scabbard from the leader's body, along with a pack that held food and basic supplies. Pragmatic. Waste nothing. Then he walked away from the carnage without looking back, his footsteps steady in the snow. The voice found him an hour later. You chose violence. I chose survival. They were going to kill me regardless. True, but you could have avoided the encounter entirely, could have walked past while they were distracted. Instead, you engaged because you saw a prisoner and decided she mattered more than your own safety. She did not matter, but letting them do what they were going to do felt like surrender. And I do not surrender. The voice laughed again, that hollow wind-through-trees sound. Good. That is the right answer. You did not save her because it was moral or just. You saved her because submitting to their claim of territory would have meant accepting that this world had rules you needed to follow. And you do not accept other people's rules. Never have. The second test is complete. One more remains. If you survive it, we will discuss what comes next. Kaedric kept walking, his new sword heavy on his hip, blood drying on his hands. The forest grew darker as afternoon faded toward evening, shadows pooling between the massive trees like something liquid and alive. He was exhausted, cold, running on fading adrenaline and willpower. But somewhere beneath that exhaustion, he felt something else, alive. more alive than he had felt in years of court politics and legal battles and careful manipulation. This was honest. Kill or be killed. Survive or die. No pretense. No masks. Just the truth underneath everything. The third test came on the final night. Kadric was crouched beside the stream, refilling his water container when he felt it. A presence moving through the forest, massive and deliberate, headed directly toward him. He turned slowly and saw the wolf again. But this time it was not alone. 6 more wolves emerged from the darkness, all the same impossible size, all glowing with that faint yellow light. They formed a circle around him, blocking every escape route. Their breathing synchronized like some kind of ritual. The original wolf, the one from the first night, stepped forward. When it spoke, its mouth did not move, but the voice came anyway, resonating inside Kadric's skull. The final test is simple. Submit or fight. If you submit, you live but leave these lands forever, marked as something that chose survival over pride. If you fight, you will probably die. But if you survive, you become something else, something we can use. Kadric looked at the circle of wolves, at the teeth and muscle and predatory intelligence surrounding him. His sword was on his hip, his knife was in his belt. Both were useless against this. But the voice had said something important. Probably die. Not certainly. Which meant there was a chance. He drew his sword. The wolves attacked. They came from all sides simultaneously. Coordination so perfect it looked choreographed. Kadric moved on instinct, his blade sweeping in arcs that forced them back, his body turning to prevent them from catching him from behind. Teeth snapped inches from his throat. Claws raked across his coat, shredding leather. He felt impacts like being hit with clubs, his ribs screaming protest, his shoulder going partially numb. He kept fighting. A wolf lunged and he drove his blade through its open mouth, punching out the back of its skull. The creature dissolved into smoke and shadow, and Kadric realized with distant horror that these things were not entirely physical. Another wolf hit him from the side, slamming him into the frozen stream. Ice cracked beneath his weight, water soaking through his clothes instantly, cold like knives cutting into him. He rolled, barely avoiding jaws that would have crushed his skull, came up swinging. His blade caught another wolf across its shoulder, opening a wound that bled shadow instead of blood. The creature yelped and retreated, and the circle tightened. Kadric was dying. He knew it. Could feel it in the way his movements were slowing, his reactions dulling, his body reaching the limits of what it could endure. Blood ran hot down his side from wounds he had not felt receiving. His vision was starting to blur at the edges. But he did not stop. Could not stop. Because stopping meant admitting that something else had the right to decide whether he lived or died. And he had spent his entire life refusing to give anyone that power over him. Another wolf came in low. He kicked it in the face hard enough to break teeth, spun and opened another's flank with his sword. They were faster, stronger, probably immortal in ways he could not comprehend. But they could be hurt. And if they could be hurt, they could be beaten. The original wolf, the one that had spoken, suddenly leaped forward, its massive weight crashing into Kadric and driving him back into the broken ice. Freezing water closed over his head, over his face, filling his mouth and nose. The wolf's jaws closed around his sword arm, crushing, trying to make him drop his weapon. Kadric drove his knife into the creature's eye with his free hand. The wolf released him with a howl that shook the trees, rearing back. Kadric burst from the water gasping, his sword still somehow in his grip, his body screaming that it could not take any more. Then suddenly, the wolves stopped. They formed their circle again, but this time they sat, watching him with those yellow eyes, waiting. Kadric stood in the broken ice, water streaming from his clothes, blood running from a dozen wounds he had not counted. His sword was still raised. His knife was still ready. He would fight until he died. They understood that now. The original wolf, blood running from its ruined eye, spoke again inside his mind. Enough. The wolves vanished like smoke, dissolving into darkness, leaving Kadric alone beside the frozen stream with only the sound of water moving beneath ice and his own ragged breathing. He collapsed to his knees, his body finally giving in to the damage it had sustained. Cold like he had never felt before worked its way into his core, into his bones. He was going to die here, was going to freeze in the darkness because he had given everything to a fight he could never win. Then hands grabbed him. Not animal. Human. Someone pulled him from the water, dragged him onto solid ground, began stripping away his frozen clothes with efficient movements. Who? Do not talk. You passed. But you are dying, so shut up and let me work. Kadric tried to focus on the face above him, but his vision kept sliding away. He felt heat, impossible heat in the frozen wilderness, felt blankets wrapping around him, felt liquid being forced between his lips. Drink. All of it. He drank without thinking, the liquid burning down his throat like fire, spreading warmth through his chest. His vision cleared slightly, and he saw her properly for the first time. A woman. Maybe 40, maybe 400. Her face weathered but ageless, dark hair shot through with silver, eyes that reflected the same yellow light as the wolves. She was dressed in furs and leather, practical clothing that looked like it had been made from things she had killed herself. Who are you? My name is Verica, and you, Duke Caedric Aldridge, just became the first man in 70 years to survive the 3 tests. Why? Because we needed to know if you were just another civilized man playing at darkness, or if you were actually willing to become the thing your enemies accused you of being. Which am I? Verica smiled, and it was not a kind expression. You are a weapon that forgot it was a weapon. You spent 15 years pretending to be a duke, following their rules, playing their games, but underneath, you were always something else, something that belonged here, in the places where civilization ends and honest violence begins. Caedric felt the warmth from the liquid spreading through his body, felt his wounds starting to close with speed that should not be possible. What did you give me? Something old, something that will keep you alive long enough to heal, but it comes with a price. Everything comes with a price. Smart. The price is this: you cannot go back to what you were, the kingdom you came from, the title you lost, the life you built. All of that is finished. What you become now depends on what you choose to do with what we are offering, which is power. Real power. Not the political theater you practiced in Valmont. Actual strength. The ability to survive in places that would kill normal men. The knowledge of things your civilization has forgotten. In exchange for what? In exchange for helping us with a problem. There are things in these lands that need to be stopped. Old things that have woken up angry. Your kingdom does not know it yet, but a war is coming. Not a war of armies and banners, a war of survival against things that consider humanity to be prey. And you want me to fight this war? We want you to become someone who can fight this war. Someone who understands both worlds. Civilization and wilderness. Politics and violence. Control and chaos. Caedric looked at her through vision that was clearing as whatever she had given him worked through his system. His wounds were closing. His strength was returning. But something else was different. He could feel it. The cold no longer bothered him. The darkness no longer felt empty. He could see in it now, see the shapes moving between trees, see the threads of something older than human civilization woven through the forest. See the truth underneath the world he thought he knew. What have you done to me? Made you useful. The question is whether you accept it. You can refuse, walk away right now, head back south. We will not stop you. But you will be human again, mortal, weak, and you will spend the rest of your life wondering what you could have become. Or you stay. You learn. You become what you were always supposed to be. And when you are ready, when you have mastered what we teach you, you go back to that kingdom that exiled you and you make them understand exactly what they unleashed. Caedric was silent for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Verica with eyes that were no longer entirely human. Teach me everything. Verica's smile widened, showing teeth that were slightly too sharp. Good. Because the people who destroyed you? The nobles who celebrated your exile? They think they won. They think they removed a threat. But what they actually did was set a wolf loose in their world. And by the time they realize their mistake, it will be far too late to stop what is coming. Caedric stood slowly, testing his body, feeling strength flowing through muscles that should have been torn and broken. The wounds on his side were already just scars. The cold felt like nothing at all. How long? 6 months? Maybe a year. However long it takes for you to master what we can teach you, then you return. And you show Marcus Halverton and everyone who participated in your exile what happens when you try to destroy something and fail to finish the job. The forest around them seemed to shift, the trees moving closer, the darkness becoming comfortable instead of threatening. Kadric could feel it now, feel the wilderness recognizing him as something that belonged. He thought about Marcus celebrating in those warm courthouse rooms. Thought about the nobles dividing his estate among themselves like spoils. Thought about Chancellor Thormont and his apologetic eyes and his cowardice disguised as duty. They thought they had ended his story. They had no idea they had only just begun it. "What do I call you?" Kedrick asked. "Right now, you are nothing, a man without title or home or identity. But when you return to your kingdom, you will need a name that they will whisper in fear. So choose carefully." Kaedric looked into the darkness and saw his future written there in shapes and shadows and promises of violence. He thought about what he had been: Duke, Lord, political manipulator, all masks for what he actually was. "When I return, they will call me what I have always been. Not by title, not by land, by what I am willing to become." Verica waited. The exile. She nodded slowly. Perfect. Because the man they exiled is dead. He died in these woods. What comes back in his place will be something they cannot exile, cannot control, cannot stop. Kedrick felt something settle into place deep inside him, a transformation that went beyond the physical changes already happening. He had spent 15 years building power within their system, playing by their rules even while bending them. That was finished. What came next would be written in a language they could not translate, in methods they could not counter, in violence they thought civilization had evolved beyond. Marcus wanted to destroy him? Fine. But Marcus had made one critical error in his planning. He assumed Kaedric valued his own life more than revenge. He was wrong. The exile began his training in darkness, and far to the south in warm halls where nobles celebrated their victory, no one yet understood that they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had tried to kill a wolf, and they had only made it hungry. 8 months in the wilderness changed a man in ways that could not be measured by calendars or visible scars. Kaedric learned to move through darkness like he had been born to it, learned to read the forest's language written in broken branches and animal tracks, learned to kill with efficiency that made his previous violence look like hesitation. Verica taught him things that had no names in civilized languages, methods of survival that required accepting truths most men spent their lives pretending did not exist. By the time spring arrived and the snow began its retreat from the northern territories, the man who had been Duke Kaedric Aldridge no longer existed in any meaningful way. What remained was something harder, colder, stripped of every pretense that had made him acceptable to polite society. The exile stood at the edge of the forest on a morning when mist rolled through the trees like smoke, looking south toward the kingdom that had cast him out. Verica stood beside him, her yellow eyes reflecting light that came from somewhere other than the rising sun. "You are ready." Kaedric did not respond immediately. He was watching a crow circle overhead, its black wings cutting through gray sky. In the wilderness, everything was predator or prey, hunter or hunted. Civilization pretended otherwise, dressed violence in laws and manners, and called it progress. But underneath, the same rules applied. They will not recognize what I have become. Good. Recognition gives them time to prepare. Better to appear as what they remember until you are close enough that preparation does not matter. And the others? The ones you spoke of. They are moving. Slower than we feared, but moving nonetheless. The old things that have been sleeping in the deep places are waking hungry. Your kingdom has maybe 2 years before the first real attacks. Maybe less. 2 years to prepare them for a war they do not believe is coming. 2 years to position yourself so that when the war arrives, you are the only one who can lead them through it. Fear makes men accept leaders they would otherwise reject. When the monsters come, when their civilized world starts collapsing, they will turn to whoever promises safety. Make sure that person is you. Kaedric turned away from the forest, away from the only place that had offered him honest truth in a world built on lies. He was dressed simply now, his expensive coat replaced with worn leather, his noble bearing hidden under the weathered appearance of a man who had survived harsh months alone. No one would look at him and see a duke. They would see a survivor, someone who had been broken by exile and crawled back barely alive. Let them think that. Let them believe he had been defeated. It would make what came next so much easier. He walked south without looking back, and behind him, Verica smiled her sharp-toothed smile and disappeared into the trees like she had never existed at all. The border town of Millbrook sat where civilization began its pretense of order, a collection of wooden buildings and muddy streets that marked the transition from wilderness to kingdom. Kedrick entered near sunset, his appearance drawing little attention beyond the occasional glance from locals who had seen plenty of travelers stumble out of the northern forest looking worse than he did. The tavern was called the Wayward Crown, a name that probably seemed clever to whoever had founded it, but mostly just signaled low ambition. Kedrick pushed through the door into warm air, thick with the smell of cooking meat and unwashed bodies, into noise and lamplight and the comfortable chaos of people drinking away their failures. He found a table in the corner where he could see both the entrance and the back exit, ordered food and ale from a serving girl who barely looked at him, and settled in to listen. Taverns were where truth lived in kingdoms that preferred lies. Nobles could decree whatever official story they wanted, but in places like this, people spoke about what actually happened. Who died, who prospered, who was rising, and who was falling. He ate slowly, listening to conversations drift past his table like smoke. Did you hear about the Halverton girl? Ran off with some merchant's son. Marcus went absolutely insane, had half the city guard searching for her. Serves him right after what he did to that duke. Aldridge, was it? The one they exiled? Yeah. Heard he died in the Northern Territories. Body found frozen in the woods. At least that is the story going around. Kedrick kept his expression neutral, his hand steady on his mug. So they had planted the story of his death. Smart. Dead men could not return to challenge verdicts, could not reclaim property, could not seek revenge. It was the final piece of his destruction, the narrative that let them close the book on Duke Kedrick Aldridge and move on with their looting. But dead men also could not be watched, could not be tracked, could not be anticipated. He finished his meal and left coins on the table, heading upstairs to the room he had rented for the night. Small, barely furnished, but it had a bed and a door that locked. Luxury compared to 8 months sleeping on frozen ground. He lay in darkness, staring at ceiling beams, his mind working through the information he had gathered. Marcus had seized his estate as expected. The Northern Territories had been divided among 3 noble families who had supported the prosecution. His trade routes were now controlled by Southern merchants who paid tribute to the crown. Everything he had built was gone. Everything except the parts that mattered. He slept lightly, old habits from the wilderness making true rest impossible. Every sound in the night registered, every footstep in the hallway, every door opening or closing. The body he had trained in the northern darkness remained alert, even when his conscious mind drifted. Morning came cold and gray. Kedrick rose, washed in water from a chipped basin, and dressed in the cleanest clothes he owned. Still weathered, still showing signs of hard travel, but respectable enough to walk through Valmont's streets without drawing immediate suspicion. The road to the capital took 3 days by foot. He could have bought a horse, but walking gave him time to observe, to read the kingdom's current state in the faces of travelers and the condition of villages he passed through. Things had changed in 8 months. The roads were less maintained, potholes and washouts that should have been repaired sitting neglected. Villages looked smaller, populations thinned by something that might have been disease or migration or simple economic collapse. The people he passed had a hunted quality, eyes that watched strangers with more fear than curiosity. The kingdom was declining faster than it should be. Not catastrophically, not enough that anyone was panicking yet, but the trajectory was clear to anyone who knew how to read it. Marcus and his allies had taken control of the north, but they did not know how to hold it. They had seized power without understanding the systems Kedrick had built to make that power sustainable. Like children who stole a weapon and cut themselves because they did not know which end was sharp. Good, let them bleed. Valmont appeared on the 4th day, the capital rising from the southern plains like something carved from ambition and old money. White stone buildings clustered around the royal palace, streets arranged in careful grid patterns that spoke of planning and control. This was where civilization proclaimed itself superior to the wilderness, where men in fine clothes decided the fates of thousands and convinced themselves it was order rather than just another form of violence. Kedrick entered through the eastern gate, joining a flow of merchants and travelers and laborers who gave the guards barely a glance. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. He was just another face in the crowd, anonymous and forgettable, exactly what he needed. He spent the first day walking through districts he knew, observing changes, noting which businesses had closed and which had expanded. The marketplace had fewer vendors than before. The craftsmen's quarter looked half abandoned. Even the noble district seemed quieter, fewer carriages in the streets, fewer servants visible in the windows of great houses. Economic decline had a rhythm you could feel if you paid attention. This was the early stage where things got harder, but people told themselves it was temporary, just a rough season that would pass. They had not yet reached the point where panic set in and the real collapse began. But they would. That night, Kedrick rented a room in a boarding house near the merchant quarter, a place that catered to traveling salesmen and minor functionaries who could not afford better. The landlady took his coins without asking questions beyond his name, and he gave her one that meant nothing. He lay in another unfamiliar bed and thought about Marcus, about Chancellor Thorimont, about Isabella Crane and all the others who had participated in his destruction or stood by and watched it happen. The man he had been would have planned elaborate revenge, would have used political maneuvering and legal tactics to destroy them within the system they had used against him. But that man was dead, frozen somewhere in the northern forests. What came back in his place understood that real revenge was not political or legal. It was personal. It was making them feel what he had felt when they stripped everything away. It was teaching them that power was just another illusion that could be shattered by someone willing to reject their rules entirely. Ugh. Isabella Crane's shipping company operated out of a 3-story building near the river docks, its facade recently painted, its windows displaying the confidence of a business that had prospered while others struggled. Kedrick watched it from across the street for most of the afternoon, studying the flow of workers and clients, noting the routines and patterns that revealed vulnerabilities. She arrived near sunset in a carriage that cost more than most workers earned in a year, stepping down with the easy confidence of someone who had never been afraid in her own city. 2 bodyguards flanked her, professional men who carried weapons openly and scanned the street with practiced eyes. Kedrick waited until she entered the building, then circled around to the back, where deliveries were received and waste was removed. A single guard stood by the rear entrance, young and bored, his attention on a newspaper rather than his surroundings. Too easy. Kedrick approached from the blind side, his movements casual enough to avoid triggering alarm. The guard looked up only when he was within 5 feet, and by then it was too late. Kedrick's hand closed over the young man's mouth, while his other arm locked around the throat, cutting off blood flow to the brain. The guard struggled for maybe 6 seconds before going limp. Kedrick lowered him quietly, took his keys, and let himself into the building. The back corridor was dimly lit, storage rooms on either side, stairs leading up at the far end. He moved through it like smoke, his footsteps silent on wooden floors, his breathing controlled and shallow. The wilderness had taught him to move through hostile territory, and every human space was just another kind of wilderness with different predators. Isabella's office was on the 3rd floor, a corner room with windows overlooking the river. Light showed under the door, and he could hear her voice inside, giving instructions to someone about shipping manifests and cargo schedules. He waited until the other person left, watching through a crack as a clerk hurried past carrying papers, his expression stressed and harried. Then Kedrick opened the door and stepped inside, closing it behind him with a soft click. Isabella looked up from her desk, her expression moving from surprise to recognition to something close to horror in the space of a heartbeat. "You're dead." "Clearly not." She stood slowly, her hand moving toward a drawer that probably held a weapon of some kind. Kedrick shook his head once, and she froze, understanding radiating through her eyes that whatever advantage she thought she had was fiction. "How?" "I survived. That is all you need to know." Isabella's composure was cracking now, her business confidence dissolving in the face of something she had not prepared for. Dead men did not walk into your office after being exiled to frozen wilderness. "What do you want?" "Information. You visited me in that holding cell 8 months ago, told me about Marcus seizing my estate, but you did not tell me everything. You left things out. I told you what I knew at the time. You told me what you thought would not get you killed. There is a difference." He moved closer, not threatening, not aggressive, just closing distance in a way that made her instinctively step back until she hit the wall behind her desk. Nowhere left to retreat. Who else was involved, Isabella? Who else beyond Marcus and his obvious allies? Who coordinated the prosecution? Who made sure the magistrates ruled against me? Who spread the story that I died in the north? She was shaking now, barely perceptible tremors that spoke of fear she could not quite control. Isabella had built her fortune by being smarter and harder than the men who tried to stop her, but she had never faced something like this. Never faced someone who had gone into darkness and come back wrong. "If I tell you, They will kill me. If you do not tell me, I will kill you. Choose quickly." The silence stretched between them like wire pulled tight enough to cut. Then Isabella's shoulders sagged, and Kaedric knew he had won this particular battle. It was not just Marcus. It was all of them. The entire noble council. They coordinated it together. Your trial was not random political revenge. It was systematic elimination. Why? I was useful to them. I kept the North stable. I managed trade routes they could not manage themselves. That was the problem. You were too useful, too competent. They looked at what you built and realized you did not need them anymore. That if you decided to stop playing their political games, you could operate entirely independently. And men with that kind of power become threats to everyone around them. So they destroyed me before I could become a problem. Yes. Who suggested it first? Isabella hesitated again, and Kaedric moved his hand to his belt where his knife rested, the gesture subtle but unmistakable. She flinched. Chancellor Thoramont. He brought the proposal to the noble council 6 months before your trial, said you were becoming too powerful, too autonomous, that you needed to be brought down before you started thinking you were above the crown itself. The words hit Kaedric like physical blows, each one a small detonation in his chest. Thoramont, the man who had claimed he argued against the trial, who had apologized with such obvious regret, who had made himself seem like a victim of political pressure rather than its architect. He lied to me. In that cell. He looked me in the eyes and lied. Everyone lied to you, Kaedric. That is how power works at those levels. You were useful until you were dangerous, and then they removed you. If you had been less competent, they might have let you keep your position. But you were too good at what you did, and that made you a threat to people who rule through incompetence and inherited privilege. Kaedric felt something shift inside him, a realization settling into place like the final piece of a mechanism clicking home. He had spent 8 months thinking his destruction was political maneuvering, power games between ambitious nobles. But it was simpler than that, more brutal. They had seen someone competent and destroyed him because competence exposed their own inadequacy. Who else? Give me names. Lord Marcus Halverton, you already know. But also Lady Constance Redwin, Lord Victor Ashford, Duchess Eleanor Greaves. They formed the core group. Chancellor Thoramont provided the legal framework. Marcus provided the political pressure. The others provided resources and coordination. And you? What did you provide? Isabella's face went pale, but she did not look away. I provided shipping manifests they used as evidence of your financial irregularities. Documents showing that you had diverted royal funds through trade routes. They were accurate documents, legally obtained. But they did not include the context that you were using those funds to rebuild infrastructure the crown had neglected. So you helped them destroy me to protect your business interests. I helped them because refusing would have meant they destroyed me instead. You understand that better than anyone, Kaedric. Survival requires choices that do not feel like choices at all. He should have been angry, should have felt rage at her betrayal, at the pragmatic calculation that sacrificed him to preserve herself. But instead, he felt something closer to understanding. Isabella had done exactly what he would have done in her position, what he had done countless times before when faced with impossible choices, which made what came next more difficult but no less necessary. I need you to send a message to the noble council. Tell them that Duke Kaedric Aldridge is alive. Tell them he has returned to Valmont. Tell them he knows what they did and why they did it. Isabella stared at him, confusion mixing with her fear. Why would I do that? That just warns them you are coming. Exactly. I want them warned. I want them to feel what I felt when I stood in that courtroom and realized the entire system had turned against me. I want them to lie awake at night wondering where I am and when I will appear. Fear is useful, Isabella. It makes people make mistakes. And what about me? After I deliver this message, what happens to me? You continue exactly as you have been. Run your business, prosper, live your life. But you remember that you participated in something that cost you whatever immunity you thought you had. The next time they come for someone, the next time the noble council decides to destroy a person who has become inconvenient, you will remember what happens when that person survives their destruction. Isabella nodded slowly, her business mind already calculating the implications, the risks, the potential outcomes. She would deliver the message because refusing was more dangerous than complying, because she understood that Kaedric was no longer operating within systems she could predict or manipulate. How long do I have? To deliver the message? 2 days. After that, I start making examples. Examples of what? Of what happens when you try to kill a wolf and fail to finish the job. He left through the same back entrance, moving past the guard who was just starting to wake up, confused and disoriented. By the time anyone realized he had been there, Kedrick was 6 blocks away, dissolving into Valmont's evening crowds like he had never existed at all. The message reached the noble council within 24 hours, faster even than Kedrick had anticipated. Isabella was efficient when motivated by fear. He had to give her that. By the second night after his confrontation with her, the entire capital was buzzing with rumors that the dead duke had returned. Some said he had survived the wilderness through dark magic. Others claimed he had made deals with things that lived in the forests beyond civilization. A few insisted he had never actually left, that the whole exile had been a trick and he had been hiding in the city all along, watching and planning. Let them speculate. Truth was less important than effect. Chancellor Thormont called an emergency meeting of the noble council held in the courthouse where Kedrick had been tried and convicted. The same oak doors, the same marble floors, the same grand chamber where justice had been performed like theater. Kedrick watched from the street outside, hidden in the evening shadows. As carriages arrived one after another, disgorging nobles in their expensive clothes and barely concealed panic. He could see it in how they moved, how they glanced around at the darkness like it might suddenly produce threats they could not defend against. They were afraid. Good. He waited until they were all inside, until the doors closed and the meeting began. Then he circled to the back of the courthouse, to the same entrance where he had been taken to the holding cells 8 months ago. The door was locked, but not well. These were barriers designed to keep prisoners in, not to keep determined intruders out. Kedrick's knife made short work of the mechanism, and he slipped inside into familiar corridors that still smelled of old stone and older fear. The building was mostly empty, the late hour meaning only a skeleton security staff remained. 2 guards at the main entrance, 1 patrolling the upper floors, maybe another in the records room, all positioned to prevent external threats, none expecting danger to come from someone who knew the building's interior layout better than they did. He moved through the corridors like a ghost, avoiding the few people he encountered by timing his movements to their patrol patterns. The wilderness had taught him patience, had taught him that the difference between success and failure was often just waiting for the right 3 seconds to act. The noble council chamber was on the 2nd floor, its doors heavy oak reinforced with iron. Sound leaked through, muffled voices rising and falling with the rhythm of argument and accusation. Kedrick positioned himself against the wall beside the door, close enough to hear individual words, far enough to avoid being seen if someone suddenly emerged. Inside, Marcus Halverton's voice was the loudest, full of outrage and fear mixed together. "This is impossible. The man is dead. We have a body. We have confirmation from border patrols that his remains were found frozen in the northern territories. And yet multiple sources now claim he is alive and in Valmont." Chancellor Thormont's voice, still trying to sound authoritative despite the tremor underneath. Someone matching his description was seen entering Isabella Crane's offices. She confirmed it was him. Then she is lying, or mistaken, or part of some conspiracy to destabilize this council. A woman's voice cut through the argument, cold and precise. Duchess Eleanor Greaves, if Kedrick remembered correctly. Whether he is alive or dead matters less than what this rumor is doing. The merchant class is already whispering that we murdered a duke and covered it up. The lower nobility is questioning our authority. We need to address this immediately, or we lose control of the narrative. How do you suggest we address a ghost? Lord Victor Ashford this time, his tone dripping with condescension. Postcards at every corner? Issue proclamations against dead men? We find whoever is spreading these rumors and make an example of them. We show the city that we do not tolerate challenges to our authority, whether they come from living threats or manufactured ones. The conversation continued, voices layering over each other in escalating panic disguised as strategy. They were arguing about tactics and public relations, about how to manage perception and maintain control. Not one of them was discussing whether they had actually been wrong to destroy him in the first place. Not one of them expressed regret for what they had done. They only regretted that it had not stayed buried. Kedrick felt something crystallize inside him, a cold certainty that killed the last remaining question about whether revenge was justified. These people did not operate on principles or morals, or even basic human decency. They operated on power and self-interest, and the fundamental belief that they had the right to destroy anyone who threatened their position. Fine. He would teach them what it felt like to be the one destroyed. The door opened suddenly and a guard emerged, nearly colliding with Kadric before registering his presence. The man's eyes widened, his hand moving toward his sword. Kadric moved faster. His knife drove up under the guard's ribs, angled to miss bone, punching into the lung and twisting. The guard's mouth opened in a silent scream, air escaping through the wound instead of his throat. Kadric held him upright until the light faded from his eyes, then lowered him quietly to the floor. The noise had been minimal, but not silent. Inside the chamber, voices fell quiet. What was that? Probably nothing. The guards patrol these corridors. Send someone to check. Kadric stepped away from the door, moving back into the shadows of a side corridor. A second guard emerged, this one older and more cautious, his sword already drawn. He saw his dead colleague and opened his mouth to shout warning. Kadric threw his knife. The blade tumbled through air and caught the guard in the throat, punching through windpipe and vocal cords. The man staggered, tried to scream through a throat that no longer functioned, then collapsed beside his partner. Inside the chamber, panic erupted. Someone is out there! Seal the doors! Get the guards! It is him. It has to be him. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, iron bolts sliding into place. Kadric heard furniture being dragged across the floor, barricades being erected. They were sealing themselves inside, turning their meeting chamber into a fortress. But fortresses only worked if you had supplies and reinforcements. The noble council had neither. They had trapped themselves in a room with one entrance and no escape, and Kadric had all the time in the world. He retrieved his knife from the dead guard's throat, cleaned it on the man's coat, and settled in to wait. Inside the chamber, voices rose and fell in argument and recrimination. Marcus blamed Thormont for not ensuring Kadric was actually dead. Thormont blamed Marcus for pushing the prosecution too aggressively. The others blamed everyone while defending themselves. Fear and pressure revealed what people actually were underneath their masks. These nobles, these powerful men and women who ruled the kingdom through inherited privilege and political maneuvering, were collapsing into infighting and cowardice within minutes of facing real threat. Hours passed. The building around them stayed quiet. The other guards either unaware of the situation or unwilling to approach a sealed chamber where two of their colleagues lay dead outside the door. Near midnight, the barricade scraped aside and the door opened a crack. Chancellor Thoromont's voice emerged, trying to sound authoritative despite obvious fear. Whoever is out there, identify yourself. If you leave now, we will not pursue charges. But if you continue this assault on the kingdom's lawful government, you will be hunted down and executed. Kadric almost laughed. Even now, even trapped and terrified, Thormont was trying to assert legal authority, like words on paper meant anything when steel was drawn. You already tried executing me, Edmund. Did not work the first time. The silence that followed was absolute, thick enough to choke on. Then, Kadric? Is that you? What is left of him? The rest died in the wilderness you sent me to. What came back is something else. We can negotiate. Whatever you think we did to you, we can fix it. Restore your title, return your estate, give you compensation for your suffering. You think this is about money and property? You think I walked out of frozen darkness to haggle over land deeds and titles? Then what do you want? I want you to understand what you did. You did not just destroy a duke. You destroyed the illusion that your system has any legitimacy at all. You proved that power is just violence with paperwork, that justice is just whatever serves the people in charge. You removed every reason for anyone to follow your laws or respect your authority. The door opened wider and Kadric saw faces peering out from behind furniture barricades. Marcus, his expression twisted with rage and fear. Duchess Eleanor, calculating even now. Victor Ashford, pale as death. And Thormont, trying to maintain dignity while his world collapsed. You are insane. You have lost your mind in that wilderness. No. I finally found it. Out there where your laws do not reach, where civilization's pretense ends, I learned what everything actually is underneath. And now I am going to teach that lesson to everyone who participated in my destruction. You are one man. We have an entire kingdom's resources. Guards, soldiers, magistrates. You cannot win. Kadric stepped fully into the light spilling from the chamber, letting them see him clearly for the first time. The weathered face, the cold eyes. The absolute lack of fear or hesitation that marked him as something no longer bound by their rules. I already won. The moment you failed to kill me in those northern territories, you lost. Everything that happens now is just you discovering how complete that loss actually is. Marcus suddenly lunged forward, a sword appearing in his hand, his face contorted with rage. Kedrick sidestepped the clumsy attack, caught Marcus's wrist, and twisted. Bone snapped with a sound like breaking kindling. The sword clattered to the floor. Marcus screamed. Kedrick drove his knife into Marcus's stomach, just deep enough to hurt without immediately killing, then stepped back and let the man collapse. That is for your daughter, the one you tried to control and cage until she ran away. She is free now, Marcus, free of you. And you are going to die slowly thinking about how everything you did to hold power ultimately cost you the only thing that actually mattered. He turned to face the others, who had frozen in horror at the casual violence. Who wants to be next? No one moved. No one spoke. They just stared at him like he was something that had crawled out of their worst nightmares and made itself real. Kedrick walked to the chamber doors and pulled them shut again, but this time he did not lock them, just closed them, creating the illusion of barrier. You have until dawn to decide. Stay here and hope guards find you before I return. Or run and hope you can disappear before I hunt you down one by one. Either way, your lives as they were are finished. The noble council is destroyed. Your authority is broken. And everyone who watches what happens next will understand that trying to kill someone and failing has consequences you cannot legislate away. He left them in that chamber with their dying colleague and their shattered confidence, walked through corridors that suddenly felt too small to hold what he had become, emerged into night air that tasted like freedom and violence mixed together. Behind him, the courthouse stood silent, its marble facade hiding the wreckage of power structures that had seemed eternal until someone refused to accept their permanence. Kedrick disappeared into Valmont's dark streets, leaving chaos and fear and the beginning of the end for a kingdom that had forgotten that civilization was just another word for controlled violence. And somewhere in those streets, the man who had been a duke and the thing that had replaced him both understood the same truth. He had crossed the line that could never be uncrossed, had become something that could not be forgiven or forgotten or negotiated with, had transformed into exactly what they had accused him of being, a monster. And now the kingdom would burn until they understood that creating monsters and failing to destroy them was a mistake civilizations only made once. Dawn arrived over Valmont like a wound opening, red light spilling across rooftops and cobblestone streets still wet with night fog. Kedrick stood on a rooftop overlooking the merchant quarter, watching the city wake into chaos he had created. Below, guards ran through the streets in scattered formations, their movements betraying panic disguised as protocol. News had spread faster than he anticipated. The noble council attacked, Marcus Halverton dead or dying. Chancellor Thormont barricaded in the courthouse. The dead duke returned from exile. By noon, the entire kingdom would know that the system they trusted to protect them had collapsed in a single night. He climbed down using the same route that had gotten him up, moving through alleys that smelled of waste and poverty, through the spaces where civilization showed its actual foundation. Rich districts had their grand facades and marble columns. But back here, where real people struggled to survive, you could see what everything was built on: fear and desperation, and the constant pressure of staying useful enough to avoid being discarded. The boarding house where he had rented a room was already being searched when he arrived. 3 guards stood outside questioning the landlady, who gestured frantically while trying to explain that she knew nothing about her tenant except that he paid in advance and kept to himself. Kedrick watched from across the street, his few possessions already relocated hours ago to a different safe house. Amateur mistake, staying anywhere that could be traced back to him. But it served a purpose. Let them search empty rooms. Let them feel like they were making progress while he moved 3 steps ahead of their comprehension. He needed to keep them off balance, keep them reacting instead of planning. Frightened people made mistakes, and he needed the noble council and their enforcers making as many mistakes as possible before the real attack began. Because attacking the courthouse had been theater, necessary theater that established his presence and capabilities, but theater nonetheless. The actual target was something far more essential to their power structure: the royal treasury. Valmont's economy ran on the illusion of stability, the belief that wealth stored in the central treasury remained secure and accessible. Noble families kept their reserves there. Merchants deposited their profits there. Even common people trusted it with savings that represented years of labor. The building itself was a fortress. 3 stories of reinforced stone and iron surrounded by walls and guards, and every security measure the kingdom could implement. Breaking into it should be impossible, which was exactly why Kaedric had spent the last 2 days studying its weaknesses. Every system had vulnerabilities. The trick was understanding which vulnerabilities could be exploited and which were traps designed to catch anyone stupid enough to try. The treasury's main entrance was suicide, 20 guards minimum, multiple checkpoints, doors that required 3 different keys held by 3 different officials who never appeared together. But the treasury had been built 200 years ago, back when the kingdom was smaller and threats were simpler. Subsequent expansions had added layers of security to the obvious entry points, while leaving older infrastructure relatively untouched, including the underground drainage system that connected to the river. Kaedric had purchased architectural plans from a corrupt records clerk for the price of a week's wages, had spent hours memorizing the layout, identifying the access point where old construction met new, where security focused on modern threats and ignored historical vulnerabilities. Tonight, while the city was still reeling from his attack on the noble council, he would hit the one target they would never expect someone to attempt. And he would not be going alone. Mance. The woman who opened the door to his knock was younger than he expected, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back severely, and eyes that assessed him with the cold calculation of someone who had survived by trusting no one. Her name was Celine, and according to his information, she was the best lockpick currently operating in Valmont's criminal underground. "You are late." "I was being careful." She stepped aside, letting him into a room that smelled of oil and metal, workbenches covered with tools and locks in various states of disassembly. This was not living space. This was workshop for someone whose entire identity centered on defeating mechanisms designed to keep people out. "You said you had a job." I said, "I do not work with amateurs. Show me you are serious or leave." Kaedric placed a leather pouch on the nearest workbench. Gold coins spilled out, more money than most people saw in a year. Selena's expression did not change, but he saw her fingers twitch toward the fortune he had just casually displayed. "First half. Second half, when the job is complete." "What is the job?" "The Royal Treasury. Tonight. I need the vault doors opened within 10 minutes of entry." Celine stared at him like he had suggested they fly to the moon. Then she laughed, short and harsh. "You are insane. The treasury is impossible. Even if you got inside, which you cannot, the vault requires combination locks that change daily. No one knows the sequence except the treasurer and his 2 assistants, and they are kept separated under guard at all times. I have the combinations." "Impossible. I have them because I convinced the assistant treasurer's mistress to obtain them for me. She thinks she is helping expose corruption. She does not know I plan to rob the place blind." Celine processed this information, her mind working through implications and logistics. She looked at the gold on the table, then back at Kaedric. Even with combinations, the vault doors weigh 2 tons each. They require physical strength to move, not just lockpicking. I will handle the physical elements. You handle the mechanisms. I need someone who can work under pressure, who does not panic when guards are 30 seconds away and everything is falling apart. Why should I believe you can deliver what you promise? Because I walked into the Noble Council's meeting last night and killed a man in front of them. Because I spent 8 months in the wilderness learning to survive things that would break you in hours. Because I have nothing left to lose, which makes me more dangerous than any criminal you have ever worked with. Something shifted in Celine's expression, recognition of a fundamental truth. People with nothing to lose were either completely useless or absolutely lethal, and the ones who survived losing everything always fell into the second category. The gold is good, but if you get me killed, I will haunt you from whatever hell we end up in. Deal. They spent the next 6 hours going over the plan in excruciating detail. Entry through the drainage system, movement through the basement levels, dealing with patrols and checkpoints, the vault itself and how to open it without triggering alarms that would bring the entire city guard down on them. Escape routes plural, because plans never survived contact with reality, and you needed backups for your backups. By evening, Kaedric felt the familiar sensation that always preceded violence, a tightening in his chest and clarity in his mind that came from accepting he might die in the next few hours. Fear was natural. Ignoring it was stupid. The trick was using it as fuel instead of letting it become paralysis. Celine prepared her tools with methodical precision. each pick and tension wrench selected for specific purposes and packed in a roll that strapped to her back. She moved like someone who had done this hundreds of times, comfortable with the rituals that preceded breaking laws designed to protect the powerful. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, her hands still working on tool preparation. "You were a duke. You had everything. Why risk your life stealing from the treasury when you could have just disappeared and lived quietly somewhere else?" Because living quietly means they win. Means they destroyed someone and walked away without consequences. I refuse to let that be the ending. So this is revenge. This is teaching them that some people cannot be broken by their systems, that there are men who will burn kingdoms rather than accept being erased. Celine looked at him with something that might have been respect or might have been pity. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. They're going to hunt you forever after this. You understand that? The kingdom cannot let someone rob the treasury and survive. You will be the most wanted criminal in Valmont's history. Good. Better to be remembered as the monster they created than forgotten as the duke they destroyed. As darkness settled over the city, they moved through streets that had shifted from bustling commerce to nervous tension. Guards patrolled in numbers triple the usual, their faces showing the stress of trying to secure a capital where the rules had suddenly stopped making sense. Citizens hurried home earlier than normal, unwilling to be caught outside after dark when dead dukes walked and nobles died in their own council chambers. Fear was a tool Cédric had learned to wield with precision. Too much and society collapsed into chaos that served no one. Too little and people became comfortable, complacent, willing to accept whatever power structure promised them safety. The trick was calibrating it perfectly, keeping everyone uncertain enough to question authority but not desperate enough to riot. Tonight would recalibrate Valmont's fear significantly. The drainage entrance was exactly where the architectural plans indicated. A rusted grate beside the river, half hidden behind cargo crates that reeked of rotting fish. Cédric removed it carefully, the metal scraping against stone, revealing darkness that smelled of mold and stagnant water. Ladies first. Celine gave him a look that could have cut steel, then descended into the drainage tunnel with her tools secured and her movements confident despite the darkness. Cédric followed, pulling the grate back into place behind them, sealing them into underground passages that had not seen maintenance in decades. The tunnel was narrow enough that they had to move single file, water flowing around their boots in a sluggish current that carried the waste of thousands of people to the river. Cédric had memorized the route, knew they needed to follow this main channel for 200 yards before branching left into a smaller passage that led toward the treasury's foundation. Behind them, the city continued its nervous evening rituals, unaware that beneath their feet, two people were navigating toward the heart of the kingdom's economic power with intent to tear it open. They moved in silence, broken only by water sounds and their own controlled breathing. Celine's confidence underground suggested she had done this before, knew how to read darkness and navigate by touch and memory rather than sight. Valuable skills in a city where most wealth was protected behind walls that had obvious entrances but forgotten vulnerabilities. The passage narrowed further, forcing them to crouch, then crawl through sections where water ran deeper and the smell became almost overwhelming. This was the price of using routes no one thought to guard. They were miserable and difficult and required willingness to endure conditions that made most people turn back. But Cédric had spent months in frozen wilderness where cold tried to kill him every night. Compared to that, sewage and darkness were just uncomfortable. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber where multiple channels converged, water pouring from different directions into a central drain. Cédric oriented himself using markings he had memorized from the plans, identifying the correct exit passage by the pattern of bricks surrounding it. There, northwest corner, they climbed out of the water onto a stone ledge, dripping and reeking, but inside the treasury's lower levels. Above them, somewhere in the darkness, was the building's foundation, its storage rooms, its guards and security measures, and its vault. Celine was already moving, her lockpicks out, working on a maintenance door that should have been sealed decades ago, but clearly saw occasional use based on the relatively clean hinges. The lock resisted for maybe 30 seconds before yielding to her expertise, clicking open with a sound that seemed too loud in the enclosed space. Beyond the door was a corridor lit by a single lamp at the far end, stone walls pressing in from both sides. The architecture of security rather than comfort. This was where the treasury kept things they wanted protected but not publicly visible. Records of transactions that might embarrass noble families. Evidence of corruption they were saving for political leverage. the machinery of power hidden behind the facade of legitimacy. They moved through it like ghosts, avoiding the lamp's circle of illumination, sticking to shadows that seemed deeper than they should be. Kedrick's hand rested on his knife, ready, but not drawn. Violence was last resort now. Sound meant alarms, meant guards, meant failure. The vault was 3 levels up, requiring navigation through storage areas and past 2 guard stations that operated on rotation schedules Kedrick had observed for days. The first station was currently empty, the guards walking their patrol through the upper floors. The second station had 1 man, older and clearly bored, reading by lamplight instead of paying attention to his surroundings. Kedrick approached from behind, moving across stone floor without sound, a skill learned from hunting in forests where prey could hear footsteps from 100 yards. The guard never looked up from his book, never registered presence behind him until Kedrick's arm locked around his throat and cut off blood flow to his brain. The man struggled weakly for a few seconds, then went limp. They bound and gagged him, stashed his unconscious body in a supply closet. He would wake eventually with a headache and no memory of being attacked. Better than killing him. Dead bodies triggered immediate response. Missing guards might go unnoticed for hours. The vault chamber was massive, a circular room with marble floors and walls lined with iron doors leading to individual deposit boxes. The main vault stood at the center, 2 enormous doors covered in combination locks and reinforcement plates, the physical manifestation of security that protected the kingdom's wealth. Celine approached it with the focused intensity of an artist facing their masterpiece. Her hands moved over the locks, feeling for imperfections, testing the mechanisms. This was what she lived for. The moment where skill and knowledge and pure audacity converged into defeating something designed to be undefeatable. You have 10 minutes before the next guard rotation. After that, we are exposed. Then I suggest you be quiet and let me work. She pulled out tools that looked like they belonged in a surgeon's kit, precise instruments for manipulating mechanisms most people never saw. The first combination lock required the sequence Kedrick had obtained through his contact, numbers that changed daily, according to a pattern only 3 people knew. Celine's fingers spun the dial with confidence, listening for clicks that normal hearing would miss, feeling for resistance that indicated tumblers falling into place. The first lock opened after 2 minutes. The second lock was different, mechanical rather than combination, requiring physical picks that needed to defeat pins, arranged in a sequence designed to prevent exactly what Celine was attempting. She worked with her head pressed against the cold metal, her entire being focused on sensations transmitted through tools into her fingertips. Minutes passed. Sweat appeared on her forehead despite the cool underground air. This lock was resisting, its designer having built-in complications that normal lockpicking could not easily overcome. 4 minutes left. I know. 3 minutes. I said I know. Shut up and let me concentrate. Kedrick watched the corridor entrance, his body tense, ready to fight if guards appeared before Celine finished. He could probably handle 2 or 3 guards in close quarters. More than that, and they would need to abort, run for the drainage tunnels, hope they could escape before the entire treasury locked down. 2 minutes. Got it. The second lock clicked open with a sound like metal sighing in relief. Celine immediately attacked the third and final lock. Her movements faster now, confident. This one was combination again, but the sequence was different, changed monthly rather than daily. Another piece of information obtained through careful manipulation of people who thought they were keeping secrets. 1 minute. Almost there, 30 seconds. The lock opened. Celine grabbed both massive doors and pulled, her entire body straining against weight designed to require multiple men to move. The doors swung outward slowly, revealing darkness beyond, the scent of old paper and older gold, the accumulated wealth of a kingdom that believed security was absolute. They are coming. I can hear boots on the stairs. Then we work fast. Inside the vault, the reality exceeded even Kedrick's expectations. Gold coins stacked in neat rows, silver bars arranged by weight, jewels in velvet cases, documents in sealed containers. This was not just a treasury. This was the physical representation of every noble family's power, every merchant's life work, every common person's desperate savings. And Kedrick was about to steal enough of it to destabilize the entire economy. Celine had brought bags designed for exactly this purpose, lightweight but strong, capable of holding significant weight without tearing. They worked together, filling bags with coins and small jewelry pieces, items that could be moved quickly and sold easily. The goal was not to empty the vault. That would take hours they did not have. The goal was to take enough that the theft could not be hidden or minimized, enough to prove that the security everyone trusted was fiction. The boots were closer now, voices accompanying them, guards finishing their rotation and heading toward the vault chamber. Maybe 30 seconds before they arrived. Maybe less. We need to go. One more bag. We do not have time for one more bag. Celine grabbed a handful of gold coins, stuffed them into the final bag, sealed it. They hauled their stolen fortune toward the back exit, moving as fast as weight allowed, their footsteps no longer silent because stealth mattered less than speed now. Behind them, voices rose in sudden alarm as guards entered the vault chamber and saw the open doors. Breach! The vault has been breached! Sound the alarm! Bells began ringing throughout the building, discordant noise that signaled emergency, that brought every guard in the treasury running toward the source. Kedrick and Celine hit the corridor at a dead run, their bags banging against walls and their breathing coming in gasps as adrenaline and exertion combined. The stairway leading down to the lower levels suddenly filled with guards ascending, steel scraping against scabbards as weapons were drawn. 6 men, maybe 7, blocking the only route to their escape. Kedrick dropped his bags and drew his sword in one smooth motion, the blade singing as it left the scabbard. The confined space was actually an advantage. The guards could not surround them, could not use numbers effectively. They had to come through a choke point 2 at a time. He met the first 2 in the narrow stairwell, his blade moving in arcs that forced them back, that made them defend instead of attack. Behind him, Celine was doing something with her tools, her hands working frantically on a door he had not noticed before. There is a secondary exit. Maintenance passage. How long? 20 seconds. Kedrick did not have 20 seconds. More guards were pushing up from below, their faces showing determination mixed with fear. They knew who he was by now, knew what he had done to Marcus Halverton, knew that cornering him meant some of them would not survive the encounter. He killed the first guard with a thrust through the throat, the blade punching through flesh and vertebrae, dropping the man like a puppet with cut strings. The second guard swung wild, his sword clanging off stone wall, leaving him exposed for the half-second Kedrick needed to drive his blade through the man's chest. Blood painted the walls, made the stairs slippery, filled the air with copper smell that mixed with sweat and fear. The other guards hesitated, their training warring with survival instinct, unwilling to be the next to die but unable to retreat without abandoning duty. Got it. Celine had the maintenance door open, revealing another narrow passage that plunged into darkness. Kedrick grabbed his bags, back toward the opening while keeping his blade between himself and the guards who were working up courage for another assault. Come on then, who wants to be next? None of them moved. They just stood there, weapons ready, waiting for someone else to make the first move that would probably be their last. Kedrick ducked through the maintenance door, Celine slamming it behind him and jamming the lock with broken picks that would buy them maybe 2 minutes before guards forced it open. They ran through darkness that smelled of dust and abandonment, following a passage that sloped downward, that led back toward the drainage system, an escape. Behind them, the door exploded inward as guards attacked it with axes, wood splintering, metal screaming. Pursuit was coming, organized and determined now that initial shock had worn off. But pursuit required knowing where they went, required tracking them through passages that had not appeared on any official map in 100 years, required finding them in a maze of underground channels before they reached the river and disappeared into the night. They emerged into the drainage tunnel gasping, covered in filth and blood and sweat, their bags heavy with stolen gold. The water was higher now, evening rains feeding into the system, the current stronger than it had been during entry. Can you swim? Celine looked at him like he had asked if she could breathe. I grew up on the docks. Can you? Well enough. They waded into the current, let it carry them toward the river, toward escape that was so close now they could taste it beneath the sewage and the blood. Behind them, bells continued ringing, the entire city mobilizing to find them, to seal exits and search streets and hunt down the thieves who had done the impossible. But the city was too slow. Its systems were designed for order and protocol, for following procedures that worked when criminals were stupid and guards were competent. Those systems shattered when faced with someone who understood them well enough to exploit every gap. The river mouth opened ahead, moonlight reflecting off black water, the sounds of the city fading as current pulled them into deeper channel. Kedrick felt something close to triumph, the sense that he had struck a blow that could not be dismissed or minimized or explained away. The treasury had been robbed. The vault that supposedly could not be breached had been opened like it was made of paper, and the man responsible was the same man they had tried to erase from existence 8 months ago. Let them explain that to the noble families who kept their fortunes in that vault. Let them explain to merchants who trusted the kingdom's security. Let them explain to common people that the system designed to protect everyone had failed catastrophically. They pulled themselves onto the riverbank downstream from the city, collapsing into mud and grass, their bodies screaming exhaustion, their minds still racing with adrenaline that would take hours to fade. The bags of gold sat between them, physical proof of what they had accomplished. Celine started laughing, a sound that was half hysteria and half genuine joy. We did it. We actually did it. Kedrick did not laugh. He was thinking about what came next, about how the kingdom would respond, about the moves and countermoves that would define the next phase of his war against the system that had tried to destroy him. Because robbing the treasury was not the end goal. It was gasoline poured on a fire that was already burning. The next stage would require something more personal, more direct. It would require returning to the courthouse where this had all begun and finishing what he started with the noble council. But first, he needed to let them simmer in fear for a few more days. Let them wonder where he was and what he was planning. Let them make mistakes born of panic and desperation. Patience was its own kind of weapon, and Kedrick had learned patience in darkness that taught lessons civilization could not imagine. 3 days after the treasury robbery, the kingdom was tearing itself apart. Noble families discovered their wealth had been stolen and immediately blamed the crown for inadequate security. The crown blamed the treasury officials for corruption and incompetence. Merchants refused to deposit funds in a system that could not protect them. Common people began withdrawing savings, creating runs on smaller banks that depended on the central treasury's stability. Economic collapse was not immediate, but the trajectory was clear to anyone paying attention. Confidence was evaporating, trust was dying. And without those intangible foundations, the entire structure of commerce and power began to crack. Kedrick watched it unfold from safe houses scattered throughout the city, moving every few hours, never staying anywhere long enough to be tracked. The gold from the robbery was already being distributed, sold through black market contacts to merchants in neighboring kingdoms, converted into resources he would need for the final confrontation. Because confrontation was inevitable now. He had pushed too far, done too much damage, crossed too many lines. There was no walking away from this, no negotiating a settlement, no returning to any kind of normal life. He had become exactly what they accused him of being, and now he had to see it through to whatever ending waited at the end of this path. The message arrived on the 4th day, delivered by a street child who probably did not know what he was carrying. A single page of expensive paper, folded and sealed with the royal crest. Kedrick opened it in a dim room that smelled of mold and old cooking, reading words written in Chancellor Thoramont's precise handwriting. Duke Aldridge, you have made your point. You have demonstrated that our systems can be defeated, that our security can be breached, that our authority can be challenged. Now it is time to end this before more blood is shed. I am authorized by the Crown to offer terms. Full pardon for all actions since your exile. Restoration of your title and lands. Compensation for your suffering. A seat on the Royal Council with authority over northern territories. All we ask in return is that you cease your attacks and work within the system to address the grievances that drove you to such extremes. We can rebuild what has been broken. We can create a better kingdom from these ashes, but only if you are willing to stop burning it down. Meet me at the courthouse at midnight tonight. Come alone. I swear on my life you will be allowed to leave unharmed regardless of your decision. This is not a trap. This is an offer of peace from men who understand they created the monster they now fear. Please, end this. Kedrick read the message twice, analyzing every word, searching for the lie beneath the apparent sincerity. Thoramont was many things, but he was not stupid. He knew Kedrick would be suspicious of any offer that sounded too generous, which meant this was either a genuine attempt at peace, or it was a trap sophisticated enough to account for Kedrick's paranoia. Either way, it was an opportunity. He burned the message in a candle flame, watching paper curl and blacken, reducing Thoramont's careful words to ash. Then he began preparing for midnight, checking weapons and escape routes, planning for multiple scenarios that ranged from genuine negotiation to immediate violence. The courthouse would be heavily guarded. They knew he might come. They would have prepared defenses, positioned soldiers, planned for every approach they could imagine. But they did not know everything. Did not know about the maintenance tunnels he had discovered during his previous infiltration. Did not know about allies he had been cultivating in the shadows. Criminals and outcasts who had their own reasons for wanting the Noble Council destroyed. Midnight arrived with fog rolling through Valmont's streets, thick enough to reduce visibility to maybe 20 feet. Perfect conditions for movement, for approaching the courthouse without being seen until it was too late for guards to respond effectively. Kaedric moved through the fog like he was part of it, dressed in dark clothes that blended with shadow, his weapons concealed but accessible. He could feel eyes watching from windows and rooftops, could sense the trap tightening around him, could almost smell the ambush waiting in the courthouse. But he kept walking, because stopping meant they won, meant they had successfully terrorized him into paralysis. And fear was only useful if you could still function through it. The courthouse appeared out of the fog, its facade lit by torches that created more shadow than illumination. Guards stood at the main entrance, maybe 20 of them, armored and armed, their faces showing the tension of men who knew they might die tonight, but had no choice except to stand their ground. Kaedric approached the side entrance instead, the maintenance door he had used before, finding it unlocked as he expected. They wanted him inside, wanted him where they could control the environment and eliminate him in ways that would look justified rather than like murder. The corridor beyond was empty, lit by torches spaced too far apart, creating pools of darkness between circles of light. His footsteps echoed off stone, announcing his presence, making stealth impossible. They wanted him to know they knew he was coming. The council chamber doors were open, light spilling out, voices carrying from within. Kaedric moved toward them slowly, every sense alert for the trap he knew was waiting, his hand resting on his sword hilt. He stepped through the doors into a chamber that looked exactly as it had 3 days ago, except now it was empty of furniture, just bare marble floor and walls and the raised platform where the Noble Council sat in judgment. Chancellor Thormont stood at the center, alone, his robes immaculate, his expression showing something that might have been genuine regret. You came. You knew I would. I hoped you would not. I hoped you had enough sense to stay hidden and eventually disappear into whatever life you could build elsewhere. Then you do not understand what you created. Thormont sighed, and suddenly he looked old, worn down by years of compromise and political maneuvering that had cost him whatever principles he might have started with. I understand perfectly. We took a competent man and tried to destroy him because he threatened our comfortable incompetence. We created an enemy who cannot be bargained with or intimidated because we already took everything he valued. We unleashed violence we cannot control because we convinced ourselves control was the same as capability. So why the offer? Why pretend there is a path back from what I have become? Because there is always a path back, always a choice to stop descending and start climbing. You have proven your point, Kaedric. You have shown us what happens when we destroy good men for political convenience. Now let us fix what we broke. Kaedric looked at the empty chamber, at the torches burning in their wall sconces, at Thormont standing there alone like he actually believed he could negotiate an end to this with words. Where are the others? Where is Victor Ashford? Where is Duchess Eleanor Greaves? Where are all the people who participated in my destruction? They are here, watching, listening, waiting to see if you are willing to accept peace, or if you have become something that only understands violence. Tell them to show themselves. Movement in the shadows. Guards appeared from doorways Kaedric had not noticed, 20 of them minimum, surrounding the chamber, their crossbows aimed at his chest from multiple angles. No escape. No way to fight through that many armed men positioned with overlapping fields of fire. The trap had closed, but Kaedric did not move for his weapons, did not react with the panic they were expecting. He just stood there in the center of the marble floor and smiled the wolf smile that had terrified nobles in this same chamber days ago. You think this is over? You think positioning guards and crossbows means you have won? Thormont's expression shifted, confidence cracking as he registered something in Kaedric's demeanor that did not match the trap they had sprung. Surrender, please. Do not make us kill you. You already killed me, Edmund. Killed the Duke who believed civilization had rules worth following. What came back from the wilderness understands that the only rule is power, and power flows to whoever is willing to take it and hold it regardless of cost. Then you force our hand. No. You forced mine months ago when you decided I was too dangerous to exist. Everything that happens now is consequence, and consequence does not care about your regrets or your offer of peace. Thormont made a gesture and the crossbows tensed, fingers on triggers, seconds away from turning Cedric into a corpse. Last chance. Surrender or die. Cedric looked at him with eyes that had seen darkness. Thormont could not imagine, that had survived things that broke normal men, that had learned truths civilization spent its existence denying. I chose die months ago. I chose die when I decided that revenge mattered more than survival. But the thing about choosing to die is it makes you unkillable, because men who are already dead cannot be threatened with death. Fire. The crossbows released simultaneously, bolts cutting through air toward Cedric from every direction. But Cedric was already moving, was already diving toward a section of floor that looked identical to every other section except that he had discovered during his reconnaissance that it covered a drainage grate leading to the tunnels below. His weight hit the weakened grate and it collapsed under him, dropping him into darkness as crossbow bolts whispered through the space where he had been standing, clattering harmlessly against marble. He fell 10 feet into water that ran beneath the courthouse, the same drainage system he had used to reach the treasury, landing hard but alive. Above him, guards shouted in confusion and anger, their trap having failed at the critical moment. Cedric did not wait for them to regroup. He was already running through tunnels that would take him away from the courthouse, away from immediate danger. But he was not running to escape. He was running toward the real trap, the one he had been building for days while they thought they were hunting him. Because Cedric had learned something essential during his time in the wilderness. Predators that thought they were hunting were often the ones being hunted. They just did not realize it until teeth closed around their throats, and by then it was far too late to do anything except die. Tonight, the kingdom of Valmont would discover that the monster they created was not the one trapped in their courthouse. They were. The tunnels beneath Valmont branched in directions that had not appeared on any map Cedric studied, passages carved before the city above knew itself, before civilization claimed this ground and pretended it had always been tame. Water ran through channels worn smooth by centuries, carrying secrets and waste in equal measure toward the river that would dissolve everything into anonymous darkness. Cedric moved through that darkness with purpose that felt almost religious, though he would never use that word. Purpose was simpler. Purpose was understanding that the trap he escaped had served its function perfectly, just not the function Thormont imagined. While the noble council positioned guards and crossbows in the courthouse, while they congratulated themselves on finally cornering the monster they created, the real work was happening elsewhere. Celine had taken her portion of the treasury gold and used it exactly as Cedric instructed. Bribes to palace servants who felt underpaid and undervalued. Promises to guards whose families struggled while nobles feasted. Information to merchants whose businesses were being destroyed by the economic collapse the nobility refused to acknowledge. She moved through the city's lower levels, the places where actual work happened, where people who kept civilization running grew increasingly angry that their labor enriched parasites who contributed nothing except inherited privilege. Revolution was not built on philosophy. It was built on hunger and rage and the specific realization that the people at the top needed the people at the bottom far more than the reverse. Once that realization took root, once it spread through enough minds, the structure holding everything in place became as fragile as morning frost. Cedric had learned this truth not from books or political theory, but from watching his own destruction. The noble council could only destroy him because enough people agreed to participate. Guards who arrested him, magistrates who ruled against him, witnesses who testified falsely. Every person who contributed to his exile made a choice, and those choices formed chains that bound everyone together in collective guilt. Now he was going to make them choose again. But this time the cost of choosing wrong would be visible and immediate. He emerged from the tunnels near the palace district, pulling himself up through a drainage grate that opened into an alley between buildings that cost more to construct than most villages produced in a decade. The fog had thickened, reducing the world to gray, nothing punctuated by torch glow that barely penetrated 5 feet. Perfect conditions for what came next. The palace guard barracks sat 2 blocks from the palace itself, a 3-story stone building housing 200 soldiers who served as the crown's direct military force. These were not city guards who could be bribed or intimidated. These were professionals who had sworn oaths and meant them, men whose loyalty was purchased with steady pay and the prestige of serving power directly. Breaking that loyalty would require more than gold. It would require showing them that the power they served was already broken, already collapsing, and that their choice was between serving corpses or surviving to see what came after. Kaedric had arranged for a message to reach the barracks commander 2 hours ago, delivered by a messenger who had no idea what he carried. The message was simple. Your families are being held in the merchant quarter. Cooperate or they die. It was a complete lie. No families were being held. No hostages existed. But the commander did not know that, and fear rarely waited for confirmation before acting. The barracks were in chaos when Kaedric arrived. Soldiers running through corridors, commanders shouting contradictory orders, the entire structure of discipline collapsing as personal fear overcame professional training. A few calm voices tried to restore order, tried to point out that the threat might be false. But panic had its own momentum, and logic was a weak barrier against it. Kaedric slipped through the main entrance with a group of soldiers who were heading out to search for their supposedly captured families. No one challenged him. No one looked closely enough at faces to realize an outsider had joined their ranks. They were focused on threats they imagined lurking in the fog, not on threats walking beside them, wearing stolen uniforms. Inside the barracks, the armory stood unguarded, its usual security abandoned as soldiers prioritized family over duty. Kaedric entered and worked quickly, gathering what he needed. Not weapons. He had weapons. What he needed was something more symbolic, the royal standard. The flag that represented the crown's authority, the physical manifestation of power that soldiers swore to protect. It hung above the armory entrance, silk embroidered with gold thread, beautiful and expensive and utterly meaningless beyond what people agreed it meant. Kaedric pulled it down, rolled it under his arm, and left the barracks the same way he entered. Anonymous chaos providing better cover than any amount of stealth could offer. Outside, the city was eating itself. Word had spread about the treasury robbery, about the courthouse ambush, about guards and nobles dying while common people starved. The merchant quarter was burning, not from any organized attack, but from spontaneous rage that found targets in symbols of wealth and authority. City guards tried to contain it and found themselves overwhelmed by numbers they could not match, and anger they had no training to address. This was the collapse Kaedric had engineered through careful destruction of the economic and political foundations that kept everything stable. Not revolution yet. Not organized uprising, just chaos that would force those in power to make decisions that revealed who they actually were beneath their titles. He made his way to the central plaza, the heart of Valmont where proclamations were read and justice was performed in full view of citizens who needed to witness power reinforcing itself. The gallows stood empty tonight, the wood still stained with blood from executions performed to maintain order through fear. Kaedric climbed the gallows platform carrying the royal standard, visible to anyone who looked toward the plaza despite the fog. He was counting on word spreading, on people gathering once they heard that something was happening at the place where the kingdom demonstrated its authority most visibly. He was not disappointed. Within 30 minutes, crowds began forming, citizens drawn by curiosity and anger and the sense that something fundamental was breaking. They watched from the plaza edges, unwilling to commit fully but unable to look away, their faces showing the calculation that defined every revolution. Join too early, and you died when power reasserted itself. Join too late, and you gained nothing when power collapsed. The trick was judging the moment when the outcome became inevitable. Kaedric waited until hundreds had gathered, until their murmuring filled the plaza with sound like distant thunder. Then he raised the royal standard above his head and spoke, his voice carrying through fog and across stone, reaching ears that had spent lifetimes being told to obey. You know who I am. Duke Kaedric Aldridge, the man your noble council tried to erase through legal theater and political convenience. They took everything I built and divided it among themselves like spoils of war. They exiled me to frozen wilderness, hoping I would die quietly and let them forget what they had done. The crowd was silent now, listening, waiting to hear where this was going. But I did not die. I survived things that would have killed softer men. I learned truths your nobles spend their lives denying, and I came back to show you what they actually are beneath their fine clothes and inherited titles. He gestured toward the palace district, toward the buildings where nobles hid behind guards and walls. They are afraid. Right now, in their locked chambers, they are realizing that power without legitimacy is just violence with paperwork. That authority only exists because people agree to follow it. And when people stop agreeing, when they decide their principles matter more than their fear, everything collapses faster than you can imagine. Movement in the crowd. Some people pushing forward, drawn by his words, ready to believe that change was possible. Others backing away. unwilling to commit to something that might get them killed when power reasserted itself. I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm not promising you a better kingdom or fairer laws or any of the comfortable lies leaders tell when they want your obedience. What I am promising is simple. If you stand here tonight and watch what happens next, you will witness the moment when everything changes. When the choice between serving the powerful and serving yourselves becomes clear enough that even fear cannot obscure it. Chancellor Thormont arrived with 50 guards in formation, their armor gleaming in torchlight, their weapons ready but not yet raised. They formed a line between Caedric and the crowd, a physical barrier that said authority still existed, still had force behind it. Thormont stepped forward, his face showing exhaustion and something close to desperation. "Caedric, please. Enough. You have made your point. You have exposed our failures. Now let us fix them before more people die." "Fix them how, Edmund? By restoring my title? By punishing a few nobles while the system that enabled them continues unchanged? That is not fixing anything. That is applying bandages to cancer and pretending you performed surgery. Then what do you want? What possible outcome makes this worth the destruction you have caused?" Caedric looked at the old man who had orchestrated his destruction while pretending to be its victim, who had signed orders with one hand while offering apologies with the other, who represented everything Caedric had once believed could be redeemed through reform. "I want you to understand that some things cannot be fixed, cannot be reformed, cannot be saved. They can only be torn down and replaced with something built on honest foundations. You spent your life maintaining structures that protected privilege and called it justice. You convinced yourself that order mattered more than fairness, that stability justified any amount of suffering inflicted on those without power. And now you are discovering that foundations built on lies collapse eventually, regardless of how many centuries they stand. So you would destroy the kingdom to prove a point? I would destroy the kingdom to prove that kingdoms built on corruption deserve destruction. That civilization is not inherently valuable just because it claims to be civilized. That sometimes the most just thing you can do is burn everything down and let something better grow from the ash." The guards tensed, their hands tightening on weapons, waiting for orders. The crowd sensed the moment crystallizing, the point where words would give way to violence, and everyone would have to choose which side of history they wanted to stand on. Thormont made his decision. "Arrest him." The guards moved forward, shields raised, forming a wall of steel in authority. 50 trained soldiers against one man standing on a gallows platform holding a piece of silk. The outcome should have been obvious, but Caedric did not run, did not fight. He simply stood there holding the royal standard and waited for them to reach him. 3 guards climbed the gallows steps, their movements cautious, expecting resistance that never came. They grabbed his arms, forced him to his knees, started binding his wrists with rope that cut into skin. And Caedric smiled. "You made a mistake, Edmund. You thought this was about me surviving, about me defeating you through force or cleverness or revolutionary violence. But it was never about any of those things." "What are you talking about?" "It was about showing everyone watching that your authority is theater, that the power you wield only exists as long as people believe in it. And the moment they stop believing, the moment they see you ordering guards to arrest a man who is not resisting, who is letting you win, they start asking themselves why they are afraid of people who need 50 soldiers to capture one unarmed prisoner." Thormont's expression shifted as understanding dawned, as he realized the trap he had walked into was not physical, but psychological. The crowd was stirring now, voices rising in question and anger. Why did it take 50 guards? Why were they binding someone who was not fighting? What kind of authority needed overwhelming force to subdue a man who was surrendering? Caedric had turned his own arrest into theater that exposed the violence underlying every civilized gesture. The guards were just doing their jobs, following orders, maintaining order. But in doing so visibly and with overwhelming force against someone who offered no threat, they revealed what order actually meant: compliance through intimidation, peace through threat of violence, justice through power, imbalance so severe that resistance became suicide. "Get him out of here, now, before this crowd turns into a mob." But it was already too late. The crowd was not turning into a mob. It was becoming something more dangerous. An audience that had stopped believing the performance, that had seen behind the curtain and could not unsee what they had witnessed. People began shouting questions at the guards, at Thormont, at anyone who represented authority. Why are you arresting him? What crime is he committing by standing on a platform? Why do you need so many soldiers to control one man? The questions multiplied, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Each question planted doubt. Each doubt eroded confidence in the answers authority had always provided. And without confidence, without the collective agreement that power deserved obedience, the entire structure holding civilization together began to crack. Kaedric let them drag him down from the gallows, let them parade him through the crowd toward whatever prison they planned to lock him in. He did not resist, did not speak, just walked with his head high and his expression calm, letting his composure contrast against the nervous energy of guards, who suddenly realized they were surrounded by hundreds of people whose mood was shifting from observation to participation. Someone threw a stone. It missed the guards, clattered across cobblestones, but the message was clear. The crowd was not passive anymore, not content to watch. They were calculating whether the guards could actually stop them if they decided to act, and the calculation was coming back negative. Thormont saw it too. Saw the moment when authority stopped being automatic and became something that had to be negotiated, justified, fought for. His face went pale. Double formation, protect the prisoner until we reach the palace. More guards appeared from side streets, reinforcing the escort, creating a moving barrier of steel and bodies. But barriers only worked if people believed they could not be breached, and belief was evaporating faster than Thormont could reinforce it. The crowd followed them through the streets, growing larger as people emerged from buildings, drawn by noise and commotion and the sense that history was happening and they could not afford to miss it. 500 people became 1,000. 1,000 became 2,000. They were not attacking yet, not committing to violence, but they were present and watching and asking questions that had no good answers. By the time the escort reached the palace gates, the crowd had swelled to numbers that made control impossible. The palace guard could shut the gates, seal themselves inside, protect the nobility huddling in their chambers. But doing so would just confirm what everyone was starting to believe. That power was afraid. That authority was hiding. That the people who claimed to rule the kingdom could not actually defend themselves without walls and soldiers and overwhelming force. Thormont made the only decision available. He ordered the gates sealed and the guards to defensive positions. The message was clear. The palace was now a fortress under siege, and everyone outside its walls was a potential enemy. Kaedric was dragged inside and the gates slammed shut behind him, iron and oak creating barrier between the government and the governed. In the courtyard beyond, nobles gathered in small clusters, their faces showing fear barely contained by the social training that told them fear was beneath their station. He saw them all. Victor Ashford, the lord who had provided false testimony about financial impropriety. Duchess Eleanor Greaves, who had coordinated the legal strategy that ensured conviction. Lady Constance Redwyn, who had spread rumors that poisoned public opinion before the trial began. All the architects of his destruction gathered now in the place they thought was safest, discovering that safety was just another illusion. Chancellor Thormont dismissed the guards, leaving himself alone with Kaedric in the courtyard, while nobles watched from windows and balconies, too afraid to approach, but too curious to look away. You destroyed everything. You understand that? The kingdom is collapsing, the economy is ruined, the people are ready to tear down the government, all because you could not accept your exile and move on. Kaedric met his eyes with something close to pity. I destroyed nothing that was not already rotten. I just exposed the rot you spent your life covering up. Every choice that led to this moment was yours. You decided to destroy me. You decided to lie about it. You decided to seal yourselves in this palace, rather than face the people you claim to serve. I am just the consequence of your choices, Edmund. The reminder that choices have weight, and weight eventually pulls everything down to ground level where truth cannot be avoided anymore. So what now? You want me to apologize? Confess publicly that we were wrong? Offer myself for execution to satisfy the mob? I do not want anything from you. I already took what I needed. The knowledge that men like you are not untouchable, that systems built on corruption will collapse when enough pressure gets applied. That authority is fiction maintained through collective delusion, and delusions break when reality intrudes too forcefully to be ignored. Thunder rolled across the city, real thunder this time, not crowd noise. Rain began falling, heavy drops that turned to downpour within seconds, washing blood and ash from streets that had seen too much of both in the past weeks. Thormont stood in the rain, letting it soak through his robes, his expression showing a man who had finally run out of strategies and was confronting the full weight of his failures. I thought I was serving the kingdom. I thought maintaining order mattered more than individual justice. I convinced myself that sacrificing you was necessary to preserve stability. And now I see that I was just afraid. Afraid of what you represented. Afraid of competence that exposed my inadequacy. Afraid that if I did not destroy you, someone would eventually realize how little I actually contributed beyond maintaining structures that benefited people like me. The confession hung in the rain-soaked air between them, truth that came too late to change anything, but at least acknowledged the reality of what had happened. What will you do now? Thormont looked toward the palace gates, toward the crowd beyond that was growing larger and angrier despite the rain, toward the future that had arrived faster than anyone predicted. Open the gates. Face them. Accept whatever justice they decide is appropriate. It is the only honest choice left. And the others? The nobles who participated? That is their decision. I cannot force them to be honest. I spent my life avoiding honesty myself. But I can choose differently now, even if the choice comes too late to matter. He turned toward the palace entrance, toward the nobles watching from their protected positions, and raised his voice to carry through the rain. Open the gates. All of them. Everyone who participated in Duke Aldridge's prosecution will face the people and accept accountability for their actions. No more walls. No more guards protecting us from consequences. We end this the only way it can end honestly. The nobles erupted in protest, their voices overlapping in panic and outrage. Open the gates was suicide. The mob would tear them apart. They needed to hold the palace, wait for reinforcements from the provinces, negotiate from a position of strength rather than weakness. But Thormont was done negotiating, done maintaining structures that deserved to fall. He walked to the gates himself and began pulling back the iron bolts, his hands shaking but determined, his face showing peace that came from finally choosing principle over survival. The gates swung open and the crowd surged forward, thousands of people pouring into the courtyard, their anger and curiosity and sense of historical moment creating energy that felt almost physical. They surrounded the nobles, shouting questions and accusations, pressing close enough to be threatening without yet committing to violence. Cedric stood in the center of the chaos, his wrists still bound, watching the culmination of everything he had engineered over months of careful destruction. This was the moment when power transferred, when those who had ruled discovered they served at the pleasure of those they governed, when illusions shattered and reality asserted itself with weight that could not be denied. But he felt no triumph. No satisfaction, just exhaustion that went bone deep and soul tired. Because destroying the old system did not mean building a new one. It just meant chaos and uncertainty, and the probability that whatever came next would be just as corrupt and unjust, just wearing different masks. Revolution was easy. Governance was hard. And Cedric had spent all his energy on revolution without considering what came after. A woman emerged from the crowd, maybe 30 years old, wearing clothes that marked her as working class, her face showing determination that came from having nothing left to lose. She approached Cedric directly, ignoring the guards who tried half-heartedly to maintain some boundary. You are the Duke they exiled. I was. My husband worked in your factories in the north. He said you were fair, hard but fair, that you paid what you promised and did not cheat workers the way other nobles did. I tried to run things honestly. It did not save me. Nothing saves us. We just survive or we do not. But I wanted you to know that some of us remember. Remember that you built things that worked, that you cared whether people could feed their families, that you were better than the parasites who destroyed you. She turned to face the crowd, raising her voice above the rain and chaos. This man is not our enemy. The ones who exiled him, who stole from all of us while pretending to govern, they are the enemy. Do not forget that in your anger, the crowd's energy shifted, redirecting away from Cedric toward the nobles who had sealed themselves in the palace. Questions became accusations. Accusations became demands. Demands became the beginning of a reckoning that would reshape the kingdom regardless of who tried to control it. Cedric felt hands cutting the ropes binding his wrists, felt the woman helping him stand fully upright despite exhaustion that made his legs shake. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much hardship to maintain illusions about heroism or justice. What happens now? I do not know. This was never about having a plan for after. This was about proving that change was possible, that power could be challenged, that people who thought they were untouchable could be reached. That is not enough. Change without direction just becomes different oppression. I know. But I am not the one to provide direction. I am too broken by what I had to become to build something better. I can tear down. I cannot construct. The kingdom needs people who still believe in possibility rather than people like me who only believe in consequences. Then what will you do? Kaedric looked around the courtyard at the chaos he had created, at the nobles facing judgment from people they had exploited for generations, at the kingdom tearing itself apart to find something real beneath the rot. He had achieved everything he set out to achieve, had destroyed everyone who destroyed him, had proven that exile and death were not the end when someone refused to accept them as endings. But victory felt empty when you had sacrificed everything human in yourself to achieve it, when you had become the monster your enemies accused you of being. When you looked at your reflection and saw something that belonged in the wilderness rather than civilization. I am going back north, back to the territories where I learned what I needed to become. Let the kingdom rebuild itself without me. My presence would just poison whatever comes next, because I represent destruction rather than creation. Better to disappear into the forests and let people forget that the dead Duke came back. You could stay. Help us build something better. No, I could not. Because the things I did to get here, the lines I crossed, the innocence I sacrificed as collateral damage in my war against the powerful, those things do not wash away just because the outcome might eventually justify them. I am too stained by my own choices to be part of any better world. I can only offer my absence and hope that my absence is enough. He walked toward the gates through crowd that parted for him, through rain that was washing blood toward gutters, through the wreckage of the only home he had ever known. Behind him, the kingdom collapsed into transformation that would take years to resolve. Ahead of him, the wilderness waited with its honest violence and absence of pretense. Thormont caught up with him at the city gates, the old man soaked and exhausted but determined to say something before Kaedric disappeared. I am sorry for everything, for starting this, for lying about it, for not having the courage to stop it when I saw where it was leading. Sorry does not fix anything, Edmund, but I accept that you mean it. Will you ever forgive us? Kaedric looked back at the city one last time, at the place where he had built and lost and destroyed everything that mattered. Forgiveness is not mine to give. Ask the families of the guards I killed. Ask the workers whose livelihoods were destroyed when I collapsed the economy. Ask everyone who suffered because I decided revenge mattered more than their survival. If they forgive you, maybe I will too. But I doubt either of us deserve that mercy. He walked through the gates into darkness beyond the city, leaving behind everything except the weight of choices that could not be unmade. The rain continued falling, washing away evidence but not memory, cleaning surfaces but not souls. 3 days later, he reached the forest's edge where civilization ended and something older began. Verica was waiting for him, her yellow eyes reflecting moonlight, her expression showing she had known he would return. You finished it. I destroyed it. That is not the same thing. No, but it is what you needed to do. And now you need to learn what comes after destruction, which is living with it. Understanding that you cannot undo what you did, that the weight stays with you forever. That becoming a monster to defeat monsters means you remain a monster even when the fight is over. But also understanding that monsters can choose what they protect, what they hunt, what they allow themselves to become beyond the violence that defined them. Kaedric followed her into the forest, into darkness that felt more honest than any light civilization offered. Behind him, the kingdom would rebuild or collapse entirely. People would remember him as villain or hero or victim depending on which story served their purposes. History would judge him according to whatever narrative eventually won. But out here, in the wilderness where only survival mattered, he could learn to live with what he had become, could accept that redemption was not about forgiveness or absolution or returning to who he was before. Redemption was about choosing what you did with the ruins of yourself after everything burned down. Years passed. The kingdom of Valmont transformed slowly, painfully, into something marginally better than what it had been. The noble council was dissolved. New systems emerged built on slightly less corrupt foundations. People still suffered because people always suffered, but the worst excesses were curtailed and the most obvious injustices addressed. Stories spread about the dead duke who returned from exile and destroyed the kingdom to save it. Some versions made him a hero who sacrificed everything for justice. Others made him a monster who burned civilization for personal revenge. Both versions were true and false simultaneously, like most stories about people who cross lines that should not be crossed. In the northern forests, Caedric learned to live in the space between human and wild, protecting villages from things that hunted in darkness, teaching people how to survive when civilization's protections failed. He never returned to Valmont, never reclaimed his title, never sought recognition for the role he played in forcing change. He had become what the wilderness needed him to be. Someone who understood both violence and restraint. Someone who had descended to depths that taught him where the bottom was and what lived there. Someone who could guard the boundary between civilization and chaos because he had walked both sides and survived. On quiet nights when the forest held its breath and the stars were clear enough to count, Caedric sometimes thought about the man he had been. The Duke who believed systems could be reformed through competence and integrity. That man seemed impossibly naive now, innocent of truths that became obvious only after you lost everything and rebuilt yourself from wreckage. Power was always violence dressed in procedure. Justice was always revenge with better publicity. Civilization was always a temporary agreement that held only as long as people believed the alternative was worse. These truths did not make life meaningless or morality irrelevant. They just meant you needed to choose carefully which violence you committed, which revenge you pursued, which civilizations you supported or destroyed. And Caedric had made his choices, had paid their cost, had become something that could never return to who he was before, but could at least serve some purpose in the space between what he had been and what he became. The wilderness accepted him because wilderness did not judge. It just was. Just existed in its raw honesty without pretense or performance. And in that existence, Caedric found something approaching peace. Not happiness, not redemption, not forgiveness. Just the understanding that some transformations were permanent, some costs were final, and some people were meant to live in the spaces between civilization and darkness, protecting both from each other while belonging fully to neither. The dead Duke had returned and destroyed a kingdom. The exile had become something new, and the man who was both and neither finally learned to live with the weight of everything he had done and become and sacrificed in the name of consequences that would echo through history long after. His name was forgotten. The forest held its secrets. The kingdom rebuilt its structures. And somewhere in the space between them, a monster who had once been human learned that the hardest victory was not defeating your enemies, but surviving what you became in order to defeat them. That was the lesson written in scars and memory and choices that could never be unmade. That was the price of refusing to accept erasure when powerful people decided you were inconvenient. That was what remained when everything else burned away, and you stood in the ash wondering whether survival was victory or just another form of defeat. Caedric stood on a cliff overlooking the northern territories as dawn broke across the wilderness, washing the world in light that made everything look clean despite the blood and compromise and hard choices that stained everything beneath the surface. He had no answers, no wisdom to pass down, no certainty about whether what he did mattered or just added more suffering to a world already drowning in it. But he was still standing, still breathing, still capable of choosing what came next, even if the past could never be changed. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask from the wreckage of their own transformation. Maybe that was what it meant to survive becoming the monster you had to become, to defeat the monsters that tried to destroy you. The sun rose higher. The forest woke into its daily rhythms. And the exile turned away from the past toward whatever future waited in the wilderness he had chosen over the civilization that chose to exile him. It was not the ending anyone would have written when the story began, but it was the ending that emerged honestly from all the choices that preceded it. And honest endings, however brutal, were more valuable than comfortable lies that pretended consequences could be avoided by people willing to reject them. The story ended there in the wilderness with a man who had lost everything and gained nothing except the hard wisdom that comes from refusing to surrender, even when surrender was the rational choice. And somewhere in that refusal, in that stubborn determination to survive what should have killed him, was a lesson about human resilience that no amount of suffering could fully erase. We are not defined by what destroys us. We are defined by what we become after destruction fails to finish the job.